So, for those of you watching in Trovo, this is going to be a debate on ritual suicide and maybe getting into more aspects of violent death as well. And this is a debate with Earthman Brick, who is a good guy. He's affiliated with the Crucible. So, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. But this isn't going to be, a formal type of debate. It's going to be more of a discussion, flesh out some ideas, and, hopefully just have a good conversation. Yeah, so Earthman, do you want to introduce yourself at all, or is that all accurate?
Oh man, that was such a nice introduction. It's I don't think I could beat that. Thank you very much, man. Yeah, no, I think you've characterized myself pretty nicely. I'm pretty much on the center, bang on the center when it comes to the political compass. I've not really tried many of the other political compass tests. The more modern ones where it's like 4 or 5 different bars, and it's like you can see how you scale on different um what is it, it's like how are you economically, how are you this way or that way. So I think you can really get lost into the weeds there. But there's all these like different unique political positions now. Like there's third position and fourth position, fifth position, and I still don't know what all those terms mean, and they tend to mean different things to different people anyway. So I'm not sure how useful they are, but which is why I tend to stick to the typical political access, because it's a lot easier to kind of spell out your own belief system. So yeah, I'm pretty much slap bang on the center. So I try to balance things out as much as I can, and one of the things I absolutely hate at the moment is just, again, it's this whole bastardization of like the left versus the right. Because I think so many times people just end up talking past each other. And this is why I want to sort of, sit down and have conversations with so many different people from different walks of life, because that's how you really get to find out people's actual views, as opposed to some sort of like scapegoat straw man perspective of like, because how often has that happened where it's like Vosh or whoever will just completely bastardize someone else's position and throw out all these labels onto someone before they've even had a chance to speak.
Yeah,
It's
and
infuriating.
so very, very good statement right there. And I think, yeah, we probably are not going to we're not going to agree on everything, that's for sure. But it's important to have those conversations and to have people be open to them. But this is important because this is definitely going to come up. But I believe you are a self-described utilitarian. Is that correct?
Um, I'm not sure. When you hear like a term like that, you think utilitarian. It's like, yeah, I want to, describe the most utility out of any worst outcome. I think that's probably where I stand on the position, but that isn't necessarily what utilitarianism is, and on its own descriptive basis. Because, and I think that's where a lot of people can end up going down uh, the point where they end up misrepresenting themselves because they stick to one popularized term. Like, how many times have you heard someone say, "Oh yeah, I'm a feminist," and then you just kind of roll your eyes. You go, "Oh God." So you're one of these pink-haired, feminazi types that just loves to throw people under the bus, and you're all about patriarchy, and patriarchy's the devil. And so, like, the moment you kind of ascribe yourself to these kind of terms and labels, it comes with a lot of heavy baggage and a lot of connotations with it. So
Uh,
I tend to try and avoid them, but it's yeah, I think there is a lot of overlap there with utilitarianism, but I don't think it's like I don't think it's completely fair to say someone is a complete utilitarian. I think many people will ascribe to some of those beliefs, the same as like someone might be an atheist, but they might actually be an agnostic to some extent, or and they might have like other spiritual um, beliefs and philosophies. Like you might get someone who's an atheist, but they believe in ghosts. It's like, well, how can you be an atheist but you believe in ghosts? It's like, where's
or
your evidence for
astrology,
that?
right?
Exactly, and it's like, so many people can be, so up their own ass about, it's like, oh yes, I'm this, and it's like, oh yeah, and I also believe in dragons. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? It's um and I'm not going to start naming names, but I think you probably know a few people who fall into that category.
Yeah, and it's also like what we were talking about earlier with labels and things, and it's so hard to just call yourself something because there's always, denotative versus connotative, and the connotations are usually nothing that you want to be associated with.
Exactly. Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, I would kind of call myself a bit of a hippie because it's a lot easier and it's got more positive connotations than calling yourself a liberal, because liberals used kind of as a slur. Same with right wing.
Because hippie has never been used as a slur, right?
It has, but lovingly, I would say. It's and it's weird because it's like the etymology and the meaning behind words changes over time. It's like, like words like gay just used to literally mean happy, but then it became a term for homosexuality. And there's many such words that have, started off, as completely benign, but then they've been usurped and taken on to um, adopt new meanings. And they're trying to do that with gender at the moment as well, in terms of like, oh no, gender is just a social construction. It doesn't mean anything. It's not factual or anything like that. Whereas, if you delve a few years back, it's like, no, it was and is. And it's like, yeah, I think a lot of terminology is kind of, it's almost like politically being changed, or at least there's political rationale behind it. Whereas a lot of the time in the past, terminology and whatnot has changed as a result of just colloquialisms. People will, things will just happen naturally. But now it's almost like we're synthetically changing language because of specific political motivations, such as what is it? The use of pronouns now has become very popularized, and we're creating new pronouns like Zim and Zer, which it's just confusing to the common lexicon. And it's like, and the moment that you start sort of like adopting those terms, and then you start saying, oh well, it's a slur if you don't call people by their preferred pronouns, that's when it's like, everyone's like, whoa, don't step on snake. It's like, you do you, but you don't make me you don't force me to do compelled speech or
Well,
anything to
and
that.
in that sense, it's almost like we have this this whole argument with religion in the schools, right? You can't force somebody to say a prayer, but you can force somebody to say the proper pronouns, right? It's sort of, you're forcing somebody to conform to your ideology, right? So
Absolutely.
and I think that the left doesn't really see how they're being hypocritical in that sense.
Yeah, and it is almost it's to the extent where it's like they're giving themselves blasphemy laws now,
Yeah,
by proxy of it.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing. Was I think Dave Chappelle brought this up in his. I don't know if this was just a tweet or if this was in one of his stand-ups, but he talks about his rapper DaBaby. He got off on a murder charge of just shooting a guy in cold blood, and nobody canceled him over that. But then he made some statement about trans people, and people are trying to end his career. Like, it's like, misgendering and trans, not bowing down to this trans agenda is more morally wrong than actual murder, right? It's so backwards now, and I don't know. We could talk about this for hours, I think, but
Yeah, I think we could, to be fair. But I can sense that you're wanting to bring it back to the original topics which we were going to discuss.
Well, yeah, and I think this we can make a somewhat good segue here. So, on the fact of definitions and things. So, if we're going to talk about ritual suicide, what do we actually mean by that, right? By ritual and suicide. And well, if you Google ritual suicide, the main thing that comes up is Japanese seppuku, which I assume that you're familiar with.
Yes, I am. I don't believe it's religious, but it is cultural and it's
Cultural
traditional.
and well, and I think you have you wouldn't really call this a religion, but you have the tenets of Bushido, right?
Yes, it's an honor-based system.
Right.
Um, and I believe that they also adopted some of that when it came to kamikaze pilots. It's like, it was almost like um, it, it was almost like an extension of it, a bastardization to a heavy degree because it was heavily compelled. I'm not sure if you're familiar with kamikaze pilots and the ideas behind it, how it worked.
Well, I know what a kamikaze is.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll delve into it a little bit then. So the idea was it was during World War II. They had all these planes and everything, but they didn't necessarily have all the armaments for them. So they because they knew that the US and everything had superior firepower, but because they had more manpower and they had more resources and they were able to create a bigger military, it was tactically it made more sense to create suicide bombers in terms of planes. And so what they did was for all these kamikaze pilots, what they did was it was considered an honor thing where they would be essentially it was their role to die for their country. And what they would do is they would take on the plane and they would crash into an enemy plane to sort of like burn down their numbers and win by because I mean that's what all wars are. It's a numbers game essentially.
Attrition.
Exactly. And so what they would do is they would compel them by saying that if they didn't perform their task, their entire family would be killed. So it was kind of compelled suicide, which is really kind of disgusting, to be ever put into that kind of position. But then, people who were fleeing on the battlefield, people who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, or because it's natural to flee in battle. Your body can just kind of take over. The adrenaline hits, and it's a fight or flight response that kind of kicks in. And so a lot of people who just naturally fled, even though they wanted to fight, were shot, usually by their own guys, because it was like it was considered dishonorable. Um, which is kind of counterintuitive, and so they've developed better ways to approach that whole system. But back then it was kind of commonplace in war. But with the kamikazes, it was all kind of compelled, and there was actually a particular situation as well that occurred where a whole squad of kamikaze pilots went out and they couldn't actually find any enemy combatants to take out. So they went back to refuel so they could go back out again. And the moment they returned, they were all killed as well as their families and everything because they should have just known to never come back, apparently. So yeah,
Oh,
it is a completely bizarre and idiotic kind of system, but um, there is a natural argument which I'll maybe delve into later as to the idea behind suicide tactics for fighting in war. But yeah, so you wanted to sort of like talk into Bushido and the idea of what is it, harakiri and seppuku?
yeah. Uh,
So if you'd like to sort of like approach that and kind of say where that's kind of come from, because I'm guessing you'll know a lot more about it than I.
well, I don't. I don't have any kind of extensive knowledge. I just want to sort of, look at, the origins of this idea of ritual suicide, and what can we consider a ritual suicide and what can't we consider. So that's actually really interesting. All that stuff you brought up about kamikazes that I was unaware of. To the point where I would say if you are coerced or even, well, you could even go beyond coerced and just say forced into committing suicide, then I don't think it's really a suicide, right? Isn't that it's not a willful surrendering of your own life, right? So it would be not willful, obviously. So can you call
Yeah,
a kamikaze a ritual suicide if they're not doing it of their own free will? I think
yeah.
you really can't.
I think it is definitely questionable. I mean, the whole idea is that they were called suicide bombers, because we didn't obviously know the term of kamikaze pilots back then, because it was just like oh, they're crashing into our bases. They're doing this and that, and it was just a oh my goodness. Sorry, I've got this cat behind me. She's jumping about, climbing the walls, and desperate for attention. So you'll probably hear occasional squeaks now and then. It's just her. It's not my chair or anything.
That's okay. No one's judging. You'll hear my you'll hear my dog bark at every person that walks past. So
Oh bless. Yeah, I think pets are probably one of the best things that kind of ground us and give us a sense of responsibility and caring about something other than ourselves. Definitely a good thing.
yeah,
Um, at least by my own approximation, I think you tend to find that what is it? I think there is a degree of like what is it, sociopathy and psychopathy, where it's like where they tend not to be able to have that connection with animals because they tend to lack empathy, so they see them as a purely as a tool and nothing more. They don't develop that whole sort of what is it, imprinting or bonding that most natural people would get, which is why they tend to say like the earliest signs of a psychopath is when they torture animals because they don't see them as these loving creatures or anything at all. They just see them as oh, what's that? Uh, what makes it tick? And they just start taking it apart and things, and then they laugh as it's kind of tortured. And so yeah, anyone who's got pets, I kind of I can kind of go, yeah, they're an okay person.
well, you know who else was an animal lover?
Oh no, not Hitler and Stalin.
Well, you said anybody with pets, so you've just admitted that Hitler's a good guy. I'm a whole.
Damn it, you got me. Oh bless. But yeah, it's yeah, both Hitler and Stalin both had puppies. Um, and yeah, there's I don't know whether they had them purely for optics. That's the thing. Um, I mean, I think it's very easy to try and dehumanize some of these characters in history as these horrendous villains. But realistically, I think I would definitely say in the case of Stalin, he was absolutely a horrendous person, and you'd be like you'd be saying, right, we need to kill them, we need to kill them. Whereas,
Well, I wouldn't even. So I'm actually going to defend Stalin here. So, but I don't think.
call me.
I think there's very few historical actors who are like just pure evil and immoral. I mean, and anybody that does, commit atrocities, it's usually for some perceived greater purpose, right? So even Stalin,
Yeah,
he killed plenty of people and did, I mean, some pretty terrible things, but in his vision, right, it was ultimately for a greater good. He wasn't killing people to be evil. Now, whether that, does that justify him or make him a good person? Oh, that's arguable. But I just think I think it's very much in vogue to just say, oh, Stalin was a psychopath, and Hitler was a psychopath, and Mao was a psychopath, and it's this psychopathy that leads to power and leads to death. It's so much more complicated than that, right? Everybody has complex motives beyond just a desire for destruction.
Absolutely, and it's like the saying goes, it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It absolutely is. There's not, everyone's like the hero in their own story. Like Stalin was and Hitler was. They were like, we need to, we're saving the world here. We're trying to, help everyone the best way we can, and it's like we've got this bulletproof ideology, and we're just going to stick to it, and we're going to because it becomes a religious kind of cult like mantra that they lull themselves into believing, and it's like the echo chamber of bad ideas. Everyone else is convinced by them as well because they're such good orators. They're just like Hitler in terms of his speeches was amazing. He's probably like the most convincing person during speeches because he managed to convince an entire nation to, do blitzkriegs and just swarm into other nations. That's not an easy thing to do. Like, could you picture like the UK just sort of like swarming in and taking in another country just, on a whim of Boris Johnson? I mean, I couldn't see it happening. But then, the current UK is an absolute shadow of what the British Empire used to be, because our military is just completely, it just keeps shrinking. And it's sad to see because, we were an empire back in the day, but now we're kind of a shadow of our former selves. But anyway, I'm digressing here heavily. But yeah, to essentially sum up to what you were saying, it's like these people and characters in history like Napoleon and Stalin and Hitler and all whatnot, they were very much the heroes in their own stories, and although they were tyrants, even Caesar and whatnot as well, who committed horrendous deeds, it was always to further their own ends.
Yeah. Well, but then also I think it draws back to this sense as well. I think this kind of gets back to what our topic is too, is there's a greater purpose to actions, right? To the point where I think if you view things in a purely life and death lens, that is very materialist. And you can just say that, and in the sense of being very utilitarian as well, right? You just look at net lives lost versus lives saved, and that is our metric of goodness. But there's this idea of if you have any kind of guiding principle that is supra material, right? Beyond material, you can justify a lot of things, right? And in the same way, if you are a materialist, if you're only concerned with the material world, then could suicide ever be a good thing? Well, no, because this existence is the only thing that you have, and as soon as this is gone, it's a zero-sum game, right? You've lost your existence, therefore it's bad. Whereas if you believe in something that goes beyond your own personal existence, then there's plenty of moments where, suicide could have a greater purpose. That's just something else.
I think it's like, even in spite of like, saying materialism and whatnot, which I think you would probably amount more so to narcissism. I think that's a better fit because materialists, care about, things more so than other people. So that's kind of, going towards, the stretch towards, I mean, it is a trait of a psychopath. Same with narcissism as well. But like narcissism is more so where it's just all you care about is yourself. But, some people will have other motivations, even not even knowing that there isn't something, uh, after death. They don't believe in an afterlife, so to speak, but they might believe in a sense of legacy, as in, their offspring. And a lot of people will go out of their way to do good deeds on behalf of their children and bad deeds as well. Let's face it. But yeah, sorry, I just wanted to interject there and just sort of add that extra little point into there, because I think it's more often than not it can be a kind of a way of demonizing atheism to some extent, whereby people just think atheists are just selfish, they don't really care much about other people, and it's like, no,
Well,
they don't have to subscribe to a specific, what is it, rule set and everything, but they can still have good values.
well, here's where I will disagree to a certain degree, because even if you are an atheist, right? I don't think a true 100% atheist or a 100% materialist, are they the type of person that's going to have kids? Are they the type of person that's going to care about legacy? Because I mean, just this idea of legacy and what this means, this is not a material concept, right? You're appealing to some sort of supra-rational, universalist idea that is, it's very anti-atheist, anti-materialist, right? And now whether you're going to say that that has anything to do with God, well, it has to do with something. It has some, I would say, spiritual aspect to it. Because if you truly are, if you're truly an atheist and you truly believe that this is the only, physical realm and this means nothing, I can't think of any rational reason you would even have children, right? Other than like a purely selfish reason to keep yourself from getting bored. Like, I think, even if you are a self-described atheist, if you're going to have children, you believe in something. You have some sort of some principle, something that you are abiding to, and I think that's one of the problems here is people don't really realize that. You're just going to, a lot of people will call themselves atheists or say that life doesn't matter, and even succumb to nihilism, when the way that they live their lives, things very much do matter, right? Things are very important, and they're things that they do take very seriously, and things that they do hold dear to them. So, your true blooded atheist versus a person that just calls themselves an atheist can be very different things. What do you think about that?
And I think you touched it very nicely there, where you went and said nihilism, because I think that's the biggest qualifier as to people who are completely black-pilled to the point where it's like I don't believe in anything, because it's like an atheist will just not believe in God, but it doesn't mean they're not. I mean, they can still believe in many of the tenets and whatever of what is it? It's like Pascal's wager. They can still believe in Pascal's wager, but they don't necessarily ascribe to the idea of a greater entity, because there's no actual physical evidence that exists that they can prove one way or another. Which is why it's a belief system, because it's it requires faith in order to believe in something that's bigger than yourself. But you can still live a good life if you adopt the principles and whatnot that are kind of put out by Christianity, and you don't have to sort of like believe in every single line in the Bible, because it's I mean, when it comes to Revelations, there's some kooky stuff in there, I would say. From what I've read, there's a lot of mention of dragons and things. I don't think many people would say, it's like, oh yeah, dragons, kind of thing. I don't think all Christians would agree with that. But then, no Christian truly agrees. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many different denominations as there are.
Well, I
But
think.
yeah, I think many people. Sorry, I interrupted you there. I'll let you.
Well, just to say, I think we've seen a lot of horrors in the past few decades that I think a lot of people thought that we would never see. So our dragon's really out of the picture right now. I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, especially when it comes to what is it? They're experimenting with chimeras, making hybrid life forms, and I think that's going down a dark route. And there's got to be some sort of like rogue scientists out there who are like borderline Batman villains that are just splicing up and making up their own thing. Because I mean, have you heard of like a what is it, plastinization, where they take human bodies and they what is it, the people, they sign consent forms and everything, so that after they die, their body can be turned into art. And what they do is they like slice up the bodies and everything, and they take off all the skin, and then they turn it into a living. Well, it's not a living, obviously, but it's like it's a preserved subject of, so you can see all the parts of the person. And it's usually what they tend to do, more so for scientific purposes. They'll typically freeze it, and then they'll slice it with a nano slicer, so they can get it into tiny little slithers, and then they spread that out, and then they can take like a 3D rendered imaging of it, so they can get like perfect representations of people. And they've done this with prisoners and stuff in the past, but more commonly it seems to be an art thing. And there's some famous folks out there that do it. It's totally bizarre, but yeah, as technology advances, and I know you're kind of one of these people who's slightly adverse to some of the leaps and bounds we're making in technology, and you want to go, hey, maybe we need to slow down a bit here. Think about some of the ethical and philosophical approaches we're taking to things, because some of the stuff we're doing is a bit bad.
Well,
But yeah,
and even
there is some weird stuff happening.
well, that whole thing with the bodies, it's I mean, it's such an interesting thing, because once you are saying that you can consent to things like this, where is your argument against necrophilia, right? Like, if you sign a contract before your death that says your body can be fucked, is that any different than signing a contract that says your body can be put on display at a museum, turned into plastic? I mean, it is very, I don't know, I want to use the word satanic, so just meaning, it's an inversion, right? We have certain principles that culturally we've abided by, and one of them is, the sacrality of the body, right? The body is sacred, and if you're going to take that away, I think it just opens up the door for very many disturbing things, as you pointed out.
Well, just to add a thing to that, because I mean, I'm Scottish and everything. You can tell by the accent. You can tell by the way I say Scottish. I tend to drop some of the T's out there, so it just becomes Scottish.
Scottish.
But yeah, in Scotland, we've got a thing that just became law. I think it was it was either last year or a couple of years ago. But basically, you know how you can sign up to be an organ donor, so that when you die, your body, if you were to die in an immediate car accident and then you were put on the table, and you could sort of like, if you'd signed a consent form and everything, you could sort of like, your body parts, as you're kind of dying, they could be extracted and used to help save other people. Well, they've kind of done a reverse of that. So like, rather than you going and seeking consent, they've reversed it to the point where you consent by proxy, and you have to sort of like go out of your way to sign forms and everything to say, I do not consent to this happening.
Oh wow! So it's opt out instead of opt in, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. Which, I mean, I'm not completely adverse to it. I see advantages and disadvantages. I see both sides of the argument to say, it's like, well, on religious grounds, I completely do not consent to this. And I know I worked with someone who would say that, no, I think it's cannibalism if you put someone else's body part into someone else. I think it's cannibalism, and it's just like, you know, I thought that was a bit bizarre because they didn't have any religious, they just had a spiritual belief that that was the case. But then that's completely in line with Jehovah's Witnesses because they believe that I don't know if you know this or not, but they don't believe in blood transfusions. And it's based on I think it's a sample, it's a single line in the Bible, I believe, that says that you shouldn't drink the blood of another person, and they've ascribed that to say that blood transfusions are a no go. So they have all these different alternative medical techniques in which that doesn't become a thing.
Well, I did not know that at all.
Yeah, it's worth looking up. Because it's totally bizarre, but there's apparently all this alternative medicine that they do for cases like that, because there has been legal cases where doctors, if someone's on the slab on the emergency table and they're bleeding out, they'll go, okay, well, pick them up to blood transfusion and stuff. But if in their medical notes and everything it says, um, a DNR, like do not resuscitate, or they'll have like medical exemptions listed there. The doctor, it's their choice to refuse those, or if they don't have time to sort of like check all the notes and everything because they're time's a factor. They can sort of like go, okay, let's just go with the procedure and we'll worry about everything else later. And the doctors have been sued for like millions. Against things like that, and I think there's a lot of legal, a lot of legal faux pas and things that have come as a result of it, which is why they've had all these alternative medical techniques available now as a result. Yeah, it's totally bizarre, but I think I've kind of hit off the beaten track there. Apologies, I'm kind of derailing the conversation as we're talking about things.
Well, it's all interesting stuff, so don't don't worry too much about that, right? As long as it's interesting, right? That's all people want. They want the good conversations, and if you get derailed, that's fine. But well, let's talk about something. So, as far as religious beliefs, right? So let's say a person, well, let's say this: a person, a blood transfusion would save their life, right? But they choose to opt out of it for a religious reason. Would you call that a suicide?
Now that's I think that's open to interpretation, isn't it? It's a bit like the idea of the suicide bomber. I mean, you might say it's not necessarily ritualistic suicide, but it's definitely a form of suicide. Otherwise, we wouldn't call them, like with the kamikaze pilots, we wouldn't call them suicide bombers. So yeah, it'll depend on the person's kind of what particular lens and perspective you're seeing it from, as to whether it is or isn't. But I definitely think it's something that is easily contestable. I don't think you would get any pushback on saying that. But as far as my own beliefs are concerned, I would say, yeah, it is kind of a form of suicide. If you're going to knowingly, but then you're kind of dying for your beliefs there.
Right.
And I think that's what a lot of I think that's what a lot of martyrdom is.
Oh, and that's a whole other thing we can get, right, is martyrdom, suicide. Like, this is a big thing in Japan. The Jesuit, the missionaries, the Jesuit missionaries would get captured by the, traditional Japanese, their religion, Shintoism, whatever, and they did a very bad job of converting the Japanese. So the Japanese would go around and capture these Jesuit missionaries and force them to apostatize. So they would have to step on a cross and like deny deny their God, right? So deny Jesus Christ. And if they didn't do that, they were killed, right? So if you refuse to apostatize, knowing that you're going to die, right? That's a form of martyrdom, right? Is that a suicide?
Yeah, I think it's dying for your beliefs, isn't it? Really, it's probably the easiest way to frame it because again, it's contestable, but it's a very good point that you raise, and it definitely it's one of those ones that gets the old grey matter jogging. You're kind of like, is it? Isn't it? How is it? It's one of those mind-boggling questions. And I think in terms of like what is it? Since we're going down that route anyway now, when it comes to Islam and jihadis, because I wanted to sort of kind of bring this up as well. Once we broach this side of the aspect of the subject, and that is when you look at what's happened with many of these suicide bombers and the people who go out with knives, what they tend to do now. I'm sure you're kind of familiar with the basic tenets of Islam and whatnot. How it's there's no drinking and things. There's no drugs. You've got to sort of like pray to the Prophet and everything. All that kind of stuff.
And no pork.
But like, yeah, that's madness. Although apparently dulse seaweed is a good alternative to bacon.
Don't ever fucking say that again.
Well, here's the thing about dulse seaweed is that it's actually a superfood, so it's really good for you.
It's actually fucking disgusting is what it is.
Have you tried it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
I have I have a very, very Irish fiance, and she loves dulse. And always tries to get me to eat it. And I every time I put it in my mouth, I spit it out. It's disgusting.
Oh, bless. It's because the thing is with dulse is that it's made from the same flavonoids as bacon, from my understanding. Because it's apparently it's glutamate is the actual taste factor that's in it.
The taste factor is seawater.
Does it just taste salty?
That's what I taste.
Yeah, maybe you didn't get the good stuff. I've never tried it myself, but it is something that's on my list of things.
Oh, never tried it yourself, and here you're gonna try and argue that it tastes like bacon. Get out of here!
Hey,
Get out of here!
I'm just recycling information that I've learned, on all this stuff.
That's fake news, is what that is.
Fair play. I can't knock that. But yeah, it's to bring it back to the Islam and whatnot with their anti-bacon. I mean, that's like an Abrahamic thing though, because it was like with the Jews as well. They don't they believe like bacon is a no-go.
Right.
Anything pig related, because they think the pigs are a dirty animal. Which I think is just pure bias. It's because they're quite intelligent animals, and I think if you were to look down the evolutionary tree, I think it's most likely that we share a lot of common ancestry with pigs. I would believe, because it would certainly explain why we can have like we can transplant body parts as easily, because we've got so many genetic kind of it's like genetic sequences that are very similar. They just mar up so perfectly.
Well, I always thought the reasoning behind Abrahamic religions not eating pork was it's described as unclean, right? And I think this probably goes back to the actual practicality of it. Is before food sanitation, it was dangerous to eat pork, because pork does carry a whole lot of bacteria. I think they say that raw pork, more than any other meat, is like the worst for you. I don't know if that's true or not. I think that's true, but either way, it's just
no. You're absolutely right, and it's you're spot on there, because a lot of like religious tenets and rules that exist. Like the idea and practice of circumcision as well is was because they didn't have soap. They didn't have these basic things that we've got nowadays, whereby we don't necessarily need circumcision anymore. It's just not a thing. I mean, it's not practiced in the UK the same way it's kind of mandatory in the US. Over here, it's like it's the norm to not be circumcised. But like over in the US, I don't know why, but it's it's just the norm. It's like, oh yeah, we just do it as a thing. You would have to, it's one of those de facto opt-in things where you would have to go out of your way to opt out of it.
Right.
But it's the reverse over here. But yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of the original tenets and things are to do with basic health risk factors. And I think, what is it? Sodomy is one of those things because it is one of the, because obviously they did not have condoms back in those days. And it is one of the worst ways to one of the easiest ways to get parasites and STDs and all manner of horrendous things. So you can see the argumentation as to why, it was oh, no, don't do that. God says don't do that. So you stop that. And I think that's been the kind of the stay mark for a lot of things. Because, I mean, do we know that all these things necessarily came from, some of it, the Bible and everything came from Mosaic law, didn't it? And before that, before Judaism, there was other religions and whatnot that came about that amalgamated to form Judaic beliefs as well. So it's there's a lot of Passover and adoption of different ideas and how they evolve over time. But that's similar to judicial precedents, whereby new laws are based on previous court rulings. So we always end up with this leftover element, and evolution actually behaves in the same way. Because the reason we had toes and everything like that on our feet was because we, back in the day, we were evolved from monkeys, and we used to use them to swing from trees to trees because of how we developed and formed. So we would have had the big toe and everything would have been opposable at one point, much like our thumbs on our hands. So yeah, but then, as we evolve over time, those features, as we use them less and less, they they're still there. They're still hangover parts. We still have a tailbone, but we don't have tails anymore. So yeah, a lot of these things kind of, end up stuck in our system. But and idioms, when it comes to language, is like that as well, because idioms, if you look up the description, they're colloquial metaphors, but we don't necessarily know the specific origin of them. The terms it's raining cats and dogs. And another controversial one is toe the line, whether it's spelled TOW, as in tow, as in tow truck, to toe the line, or is it TOE, as in your actual toe, and it's toe the line, as in you're you're on the the Olympics and stuff, you're about to do a running thing and your toe is on the line ready for it to start off. So we don't actually know the full ins and outs of the origins of some of these original idioms, because they're kind of hangovers and leftover parts that we can't necessarily sum up as to where the original origin of the idea is. But there was reason and justification for it, and it's just become part of the lexicon ever since. And social convention or tenets. So yeah, I think a lot of that stuff can be quite interesting. And in terms of circumcision, in terms of the not eating pork, again, I'd say you're bang on in saying that a lot of it was to do with disease, bacteria, looking after the group by a sort of by a dogma enough to say it's well, God has decreed that you shall not do this. and so people were, because if it was just your mom and dad who said, don't do that because I'm telling you not to, they're just gonna kind of go, screw you, mom and dad, I'm gonna do it anyway. Whereas if it's decreed by God, they're going to be like, oh, okay, well, if God says I don't do it, then there's got to be a really valid reason for it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that definitely is the case. You could at least make the case that a lot of this did develop out of just sheer practicality.
Yeah, because I mean, I know that like, what is it, when it comes to philosophy and things with God in the Bible, a lot of the things, you can say would have come direct from God. But some of these things are kind of passovers from older religions, like you said before with what was it, Mosaic law. Like the whole idea of Christianity is that it came from Judaism, and it's the same with what was it, Islam. It's kind of a mix. It's kind of a hybrid of the two. It's like it came from Judaism as well as Christianity, and they just believed that what is it, Christ was a prophet, that he wasn't the Son of God, that he just heard the word of God.
Correct. You there?
You all right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, yeah. So I said that's correct. Yeah. So they believe Jesus as a prophet. But Islam's a pretty interesting religion in the sense that I don't know. I think this has been presented a lot. Is if you look at the actual tenets, there isn't that much different between the overall morality of Islam versus Christianity. Whereas the difference is Christianity is very internal. Like it's you follow these rules of your own free will, and I mean, to a certain degree, society is going to base laws around like the Ten Commandments in a certain sense. Stealing is illegal, murder is illegal, but is there anything really stopping you from committing adultery? Like, is adultery illegal? Are you going to get stoned for it?
I would stipulate that it's like I know what you're trying to say here, and I would just like to sort of like clarify as well, just for the audience, in terms, it's like you're saying it's internal, but I think you mean personal. It's very much a personal kind of belief and philosophy, and it's up to the individual to sort of like because it's almost managed through your own guilt, your own conscience,
right?
In terms of whether or not you follow the tenets. And it's like in the case of Catholicism, you go to confession in order to profess your sins, and then they'll say 12 Hail Marys and shot a lager, and then you're okay. I don't know what all the punishments and rituals are in terms of how you make amends with God in terms of Catholicism, but they make you do weird things in order, and then it's like okay, right, there's your loophole, you can go on your merry way. Whereas I think a lot of the in terms of the confessional, it was kind of used as a means of blackmailing people, because it was very much feel free to come in this little box and tell bleed out all your secrets and personal information. We won't take advantage and or ask you for substantial donations if you catch my drift. I think that's how the Roman Catholic Church managed to get so rich in so many ways, because they were so tight knit with the local communities in that regard. But sorry, I'm digressing now. I just wanted to kind of qualify and say that it's very much a personal thing, which is very much leans to the right wing of the spectrum, where it's individuality. It's very much don't step on snake, live and let live kind of philosophy, where everyone just kind of agrees to these tenets, and there's no police of vice and virtue or anything like the Islam faith has.
And so that's the thing is Islam is sort of the opposite. It's very top down. If you transgress, there's going to be immediate and thorough punishment, and it's interesting to see how these different societies sort of manifested. And you can look at Christendom as it has been for the past 2,000 years, and you could look at I think. I think we're digressing a lot here, but I think it's worth talking about. You look at liberalism, right, or libertarianism, however different they are. I think this is very much the consequence of this personal type of morality, right? So people are they're held to their own. The only thing stopping them from transgressing, right, is their own guilt. And then once you take guilt out of the equation, right, so once we remove that sort of shame culture, you get what you have today, which is just rampant degeneracy, and the trans ideology, right? Because we can get more and more into that, but whereas in Islam, right, you don't have that. Instead, you have this highly militant, highly they're very devout, right? And whether you think that the devotion is personal or imposed, either way, I think if you look at any religion in the world, it's Islam that is actually making an effort to follow its tenets to the best of their ability. And why is that, and how did that occur? I don't really know. I think that's a very long conversation that could be had.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on to say it. I'm just going to go off on two little tangents here. One which will bring back to the original point I was originally trying to say with the jihadis, and the other point was oh shit, I've forgotten now. Hopefully I'll remember it by the time I go back to it. But in terms of jihadis, what I was saying is how they say, don't eat pork, don't do drugs, don't do alcohol. Before they go off on their suicide bombing thing, they pump themselves full of drugs. They go out and they have a binge. They do this, that, and the next thing, because they essentially give themselves carte blanche to do anything they like, and then they go all out. And to be honest, most of these people are brainwashed into it. What they do is they go out and because it's usually organized by terrorist split groups who are I don't know if you know how terrorist splinter cells work, but they're kind of autonomous groups. There's no real hierarchy there. They don't coordinate with other teams or anything. They just do their own thing. And they become isolated, which makes them harder to track down and destroy them, because there's no organizational hierarchical network. They all operate independently of one another, but they all have the similar aims, which makes them so formidable. Because how can you challenge something like that? It's if they're all operating in the dark. Especially from one another. But what they do is they'll grab someone who is easily mentally compromisable, basically someone who's easy to brainwash, like someone who's quite high up on the autistic spectrum, and they'll grab that person and they'll feed them with their dogma and everything, and they'll bring them in almost like a cult, and then they'll sort of they'll be their best friend, and they'll be they'll do this and that, and they'll treat them like family and everything. Because what they'll do is they'll get them so that they're usually the lonely incels that have nothing going for them, and they'll target those kind of people, and then they'll bring them into the fold. They'll give them everything they've kind of essentially wanted, and they'll do this and that and the next thing, and then I'll say it's okay, we need you to do something for us, kind of thing, and then they'll brainwash them into the whole the radical Islamism. And pump them full of drugs and everything, and convince them that they're going to go to heaven and there's going to be all these virgins and everything, and they'll go out and do all these acts, but they wouldn't be able to do those acts if they were like in any way rational, which is why they pump them full of drugs in order to sort of like like PCP and everything like that, so they don't feel the pain, they don't feel anything like that, and they're full of cocaine, this, that, and the next thing, and they go out and they do all this stuff in the name of God, and they chant the mantra, because they're kind of convinced, and it's very sad. It's actually kind of heartbreaking, but all these villainous people that you see, like the radical Islamic preachers and whatnot, they tend to be the people who do the converting. They'll go off and they'll sort of like speak to all these radical groups, and they'll try and pull out all these people, and they're essentially recruiters. And one of the biggest places for recruiting radical Islamists and whatnot tends to be the prison system, because they'll get people to, what they'll do is they'll form like protection rackets, and they'll form like specific kinds of gangs, and like probably the biggest gangs in prisons now that are so organized and actually have networks are the Muslim prison gangs, because Islam is, it's almost like barbaric in terms of its tenets and ideals, like with Sharia and everything. So they can form this really sort of like simple hierarchies that actually tend to thrive in damn near any environment. And I think it is very interesting as to how they go about that. So even in terms of like suicide bombers and everything, it takes a lot to convince many of these people in order to do to commit these acts. And many of these people are not mentally well. They've been preyed on, and they've been converted.
So it sounds a lot like the U.S. government, the CIA.
It actually does. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but honestly, I mean, I'm joking aside, the tactics that you describe, I mean, how is that any different than like, this whole thing came out with like the group of people that tried to kidnap the governor of shit, I don't even remember what state it was. But I mean, it's almost exactly what you described. They sort of lure in these people that are already sort of unstable or autistic, and then promise them like a network of people that are similar in ideology to them, and then convince them to do things that are not good.
Yeah, and the FBI do it as well. They've been caught on more than once on several occasions doing it. And I think things like what is it, the JFK assassination? I believe that was most likely. There's so much evidence to say that was it was like covert ops, especially when it comes to that, it was like several shooters. They were all kind of coordinating. And then they had a fall guy, and that's what they typically do, is they create fall guys that will take the blame. So they might not even be guilty of the act. They might have just been convinced, and they're not necessarily sure that they're going to even commit the act. So they commit the act themselves, and then they're there as well, which is why there was so many bullets firing around to try and take out JFK. And they just had a fall guy there that was there ready to sort of like, serve as the sacrificial lamb to the slaughter, to
Just
hide
like,
the government's own involvement.
And even more recently, the Las Vegas guy. I mean, it was something like, they said that he was shooting like 50 rounds per second or something like that. I mean, not like that, but it was just the way it had to have been multiple shooters, right? And he was just spitting out ammo way more than a single guy could. So, it had to have been multiple shooters, and there's no way he could have gotten all this stuff into the hotel room himself, but he was the only guy that was, held responsible for anything, right? So he was definitely the fall guy for some larger plot. And
I mean, we can speculate and stuff. I mean, we don't know these things for facts, but, it's certainly good to kind of entertain these things, especially when we do get redacted files that do speak of these instances. I mean, who'd you call him? Oh, what's his name? Clint Eastwood did a recent film, and it was about a fall guy. I'll just do a quick
Oh
check on that one.
yeah, that one was fuck. What was the name of that movie? But I know exactly what you're talking about.
I think it's the name of a guy, and he was fall guy. I'm just looking on IMDb just now. Clint Eastwood, actor, hide, director. Richard Jewell?
Richard
Is that
Jewell, yeah.
Tom?
That's
I'm just
the
going to
one.
look up the synopsis. So it says security guard Richard Jewell is an instant hero after foiling a bomb attack in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, but his life becomes a nightmare when the FBI leaks to the media that he is a suspect in the case. Yeah, I think they went and pinned a lot of stuff on him so that he actually took the fall. And what they would do is it was essentially gaslighting. They took him in for all these multiple interrogations, and I think they knew that he was susceptible to their techniques, because you can use. I don't know if you're familiar with mentalism. It sounds like a made-up thing, but it's what it is it's like it's a form of manipulation, and you can do it with words and things, wordplay. Like if you use like rhyming words of word association, you can actually influence people's decisions and choices. Like for example, if I was to show you like three colors or something, and I said okay, I need you to pick one, and then the way I asked the question actually was not just a leading question, but it actually influenced your decision. Like if I said the words, right, I want you to think about it, and if I wanted you to pick the color pink, I would say words that rhymed with it, like think, and I want you to sort of like, and just use the word P a lot. You'd be more prone to pick that thing because, it's subconsciously in your mind, you're kind of thinking of it, and that will influence your decision in a great way. So you can, and it is what it is it's almost like a form of I don't know the term for it. I don't know if it, like subversion is the right term or not, but there's whole books on the
Suggestion,
thing.
maybe.
Yes, it's through and through the power of suggestion, and I think like Darren Brown, he's like one of the best in the industry. He's like got his own TV show and everything, and he goes through how he gets people to how he influences people's choices and decisions, and how he was able to. I think he like he's not any good at chess or anything, but he was able to beat. I think it was like 4 grandmasters in a tournament. Just because what he did was he used, I think it was like memory techniques, and what he did was he was playing against. I think it was like about 9 grandmasters. He drew against one of them. 4 of them he defeated, and the other 4 defeated him. But if he was looking to just get a ranking on the table, he would get a ranking because he was able to beat 4 chess masters. But what he did was he used memory techniques and everything, and he used the move sets of one against the other. So he would actually be playing them, and he played them all at the same time.
What?
But yeah, there's some really strong, powerful people out there mentally, and the FBI and everything. They've got like guidebooks and everything on all this stuff. They know how to influence people and push them into decisions. But I think that movie is meant to be very, very interesting. The Richard Jewell one, because it shows how they go and throw him under the bus.
So, what do you think about 9/11? You think that's legit?
I'm not. I don't know enough about it, to be honest. to sort of like make one uh, passing judgment or not. But I can believe that with the whole Enron situation, um, I think at the very least, if you want to go down the shallow waters of conspiracy, there, you can say that Bush was warned, and he thought, there might be an attack um, the on this thing, the World Trade Center, and so he was like, okay, well, we can sort of like do all this shady stuff with Enron and just basically asset fleece the company and everything, and then get a massive windfall from it. But again, that's like, just dipping your toe in the water. There's like all this thing about like the steel beams and everything, how jet fuel can't melt steel beams. But um, there was so many like things back and forth about it. What about yourself? What do you believe on it?
Well, just on the train of thought that we were on, I mean, what seems like a more likely scenario that these three men from a third world country were able to do complex maneuvers in a plane that they had never, driven before, or that they were the fall guys of some larger, internal intelligence agency plot.
Well, they did find out that they'd been training on Microsoft Flight Simulator, so they'd been learning how to fly the planes and everything, and they would have had rough what is it, like blueprints of the basic flight controls and whatnot as well. It was definitely planned, and the reason, I mean, like, how many of them didn't hit their targets? Because I think there was 9 planes, so
Oh,
many of
really? I
them
thought
didn't
there
hit.
was. I thought there was just four, but you might be right. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was only three. I think there was only 3 successful ones that managed to hit their targets. There was one that hit the Pentagon, and the 2 that hit the World Trade Center. And I don't know if there was like another one that maybe got hit off a target, but I think the other ones were either shot down or. I mean, I don't know. It's not something I've really looked into too heavily. But
Well,
again,
the
it's a massive rabbit hole that you can go down, and there's so much conspiracy there. Like, it was the lizard alien people that were behind it all along.
well, one of the things is that, well, if you look at the one that hit the Pentagon, right? I mean, you've seen the Pentagon. It's not a tall building.
Yeah, it's very shallow.
And you can't just take a Boeing and dive bomb it. It doesn't work like that. So the maneuver that would be required to hit such a low building at the angle that allegedly happened, right? They would have had to essentially circle the plane, spiral it down, right? I don't know if you've ever, well, I would assume that you've been on a plane, right? Sometimes your altitude is too high as you're flying into the runway, so you kind of have to like circle around the runway and then come into it again. You know what I'm talking about? Is this making sense?
Yeah, I mean, you can get like what is it they call them? It's basically like if you're like flying nearby a factory or something, you can actually catch the heat that's coming off the buildings and everything, and that can actually influence the trajectory of the plane
Really?
because it's yeah, there's lots of little like wind factor and everything. You've got like there's a lot you've got to compensate for. Same as if you're a sniper and you're firing a gun, the it can affect the bullet's trajectory. Like things like wind factor and if there's any other bodies kicking about, you've got to sort of kind of compensate for that. Same with your golf swing if you're like hitting a golf ball. Um, like wind and other factors are going to take a heavy role as to the trajectory of it. And you think about it, a plane, it's like it's not like it's on the ground. It's not like it's just on a single kind of plane. There's all sorts that can just pull it off course.
Well, yeah, and so everything that you're saying, right? Well, because of all that, this would have been a very, very complex maneuver in order to hit such a low building as the Pentagon. And I mean, do you really think that they would have obtained that level of skill from Microsoft flight simulator.
Yeah, it's not overly difficult to fly a plane. It's I think like if you're like I mean, there's a world of difference between a biplane if you're just flying one of those where it's you've just got a couple of controls and everything, as opposed to a giant plane. But all you need to do is just keep a track of the things that you need to know. So you just learn the bare minimum, and you just take the manual controls. And because I mean, a lot of the factors involved on like a plane is just to keep it as to minimize turbulence, is to keep it a nice and comfortable, cozy ride for all the passengers. So you don't have to worry too much about all those factors. If you're just going to go and plow it straight into a building, you don't have to worry about oh, where's the button for the landing gears or anything. You don't need to worry about that because it's not going to be a factor. So yeah, they could just focus in on how to essentially guide the plane, because they're not worried about their own personal safety or anything. So they don't need to worry about all the health and safety regulations. You get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. I still think it's a pretty far-fetched scenario.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever flown a plane or anything?
No.
Have you ever done one in a flight simulator or?
I did a couple barrel rolls at the fighter jet simulator. I don't think that's at all accurate as to how it is to actually fly a plane.
I mean, it's not too far off. Granted, there's going to be a lot of other factors that'll play a role, but again, it's not like they were doing complex maneuvers.
But they were. In order to spiral into the Pentagon, they would have had to essentially circle the building like 4 or 5 times, right? And then pinpoint right into that the wall that they hit, right? You, like I said, you can't just dive bomb the plane like you could maybe a smaller aircraft. I mean, this is a Boeing, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think either of us are actual pilots or anything. So all we can do is
Neither were
essentially
they.
speculate. Yeah, all we can do is essentially speculate. But I've heard some situations and whatnot, and if you do take enough like flight simulation lessons and everything, you can easily get to grips with how to do many things. I mean, it's with a lot of stuff like what is it, monkey see, monkey do. You can pick up and learn a lot, and you can just literally see one person doing it, and then you can just transcribe and do the things yourself. Like for example, I was able to take apart complex machinery, having never done that before, take it all apart, replace internal components and microcircuitry, and pull it all back together just by watching a video on it, like one single video. And it's like, okay, what are they doing? And then you just pause and play, and you can just pick it up rather easily. And again, all they needed to do was learn the essential basics. But again, I think we're jumping into the weeds here. So if we want to take it back down to the role of ritualistic suicide, let's see. So we covered kind of the.
Well, let's
I think,
let's just iron this out about jihadis. So, do you
okay.
believe that there is not a single jihadi who's just an independent actor who just decided that he was tired of seeing the disrespect towards Allah and then just decided to act out?
Yeah, I think there are
So you think
situations where that does occur, but they're, again, if you look at the mental history and stuff of some of these people, they these radicals and stuff, it takes a lot of convincing and self-determination in order to do these acts. It's not natural or rational behavior. I think we can agree on that.
Well, and I think that is what I find so compelling about it. Um, because well, I guess to say it is irrational. Well, there's plenty of things that are not rational that we do accept, right? I mean, religion in general is not rational, right? It's supra-rational, and I think the religion itself is a very good thing, right? And I think it can give life a lot of meaning. And now this is going to get a little bit philosophical here. I think that life has the most meaning once you've sort of given up its importance as life, if that makes sense. So if a person is successfully gotten into the mindset that there is something more important than their physical existence, that there is something that they are going to literally give away their own existence for because they believe in such a supra-rational, supra-material purpose, I think that that's sort of, I think that's almost the goal of many of us, right? I mean, we want to believe in something and have such a conviction that our life has meaning, right? And I think in the moment that you give away your life for that purpose, you are sort of giving it meaning, right, in this ultimate sense, right? So in the moment of losing your life has the most meaning. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. And I would say, like, in order to sort of best portray this, it's best to take a specific example. And I would say one of the best examples is, are you familiar with the band Rage Against the Machine?
Yes.
For one of the covers for their albums, it's
Yeah,
got
the
like a
the
picture.
self-immolation.
Exactly. That's where I'm going down here with this. And it was you know what happened there?
Well, I believe it was Hindu monks.
It was a Buddhist monk, to my knowledge, and
Okay.
what it was it was the protest of Tibet being taken by China,
Oh, right, right, right.
and that's still a taboo subject. You'll get axed on social media if you bring up Tibet. Like, who'd you call him? Suffered heavy backlash from it. Brad Pitt.
Oh, really?
He was kind of excised and shit canned in Hollywood for the longest time because he did a film called 7 Years in Tibet, which
Oh,
was all
yeah.
about the Chinese occupation of the country. Because I think when the ruler took over, he said religion is poison, and they were literally putting people in cages, like not like the whole idea of oh, there's children in cages down at the border. This is like Vlad the Impaler style, where it's like the cage is like you wouldn't put a dog in this cage, and they would put like people in, so they're like and they're on this public display to be shamed and smited. Kind of like that whole what is it? Religious extremism that you see from the Islamic countries where they have stonings and they cut people's limbs off and that sort of thing. It's just absolute barbarism, where it's like effectively a totalitarian regime that's in power that instills all this horrendous things. So, seeing this absolute contempt and everything for the practice of Buddhism and religious beliefs, because with China being communist, they're anti-theist. They're
Right.
not atheist. They're anti-theist. They believe that the only thing that you should worship is the state. Obviously, I say the Chinese state believes this. This isn't what Chinese people believe. I think it's what Chinese people are forced to believe.
Right.
And it's always important to make those kind of distinctions. The same with like Islam. Islam is a institution, and it's important to sort of like delineate between the two, because it's like I think many people do not like the Roman Catholic Church. That doesn't mean that they don't like Catholics, because a lot of Catholics are fine, decent people. Same with Muslims. A lot of Muslims are fine and decent people, and most people would agree with them, to be fair. It's when you sort of like you get the institutional elements. They tend to be the top down hierarchies that are very, that spew forth the poison and ruin it for everyone else, because they cast everyone with the same aspersions and brush, uh, by design usually. But yeah, so that's why you went and committed the whole act of self-immolation, was to bring attention to the occupation of Tibet. And I think we're probably going to see a similar thing in the future, with regards to Taiwan, because China are radically, radically escalating their military programs and increasing their numbers in that regard. I mean, you've probably seen the overblown military parades that they have, where everyone is, all in absolute sync.
Well, I haven't seen those, but I do know it. Well,
They're
there and
scary.
Hong Kong as well, right? They're really trying to crack down.
Yeah, I think there was like some sort of an agreement where Hong Kong was like part of the British Empire for the longest time, and then it got handed over. I think it was like a 100-year agreement or something, where they agreed that it would become its own independent state. But China don't recognize it as an independent state, and it's actually, there's a lot of they they do, it's like, I think there was a thing with that wrestler guy. What's his name? Uh, oh, shoot, he was in the new film, The Suicide Squad.
Batista? No.
Oh, I'll need to look it up on IMDb here.
Not John Cena.
That's the one,
Oh,
John
it's John
Cena.
Cena? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he did a public announcement recently where he spoke out against Taiwan and, Hong Kong and all that. And he spoke out against that in Mandarin, which is like the Chinese language.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and he did a big public announcement and whatnot about it. So yeah, absolutely bizarre what's happening. Like a lot of the things, like with because like it's a huge, huge market, China. So like Disney and all these companies will fall over themselves in order to appease them, because they want that money
Oh,
and
yeah,
to
there's a
secure
big
that
thing with
funding.
what LeBron James, right?
I don't know about that. What's happened there?
Oh, I think somebody wanted him to make a statement against. I think it had to do with the Uyghurs, right? The
Oh wow,
Muslims, and like
yeah.
he refused to do it. He like he wouldn't make a statement about it. Something, it was like, oh, he's bought out by China. The NBA is run by China. Um, it's something along those lines, and you see that with a lot of these different celebrities. Uh, and yeah, it is very well. It's problematic because well, people don't want to believe that a foreign country has
That much influence and
that much
power over.
influence. Yeah,
Yeah.
but then
Yeah, we see that in the UK as well. It's like, and the US is the same now. It's like the amount of corporations and everything that have so much influence over our politics, as well as our mainstream media and even our entertainment. Like, just like, what is it? I think one of the major football teams, I think it's Manchester United, is like, because football's massive over here. And not sorry, soccer is massive over here. We call it
there we go.
football, but yeah. So yeah, like Manchester United is owned by a Russian oligarch, and there's like you could actually split up London according to different countries and nations. Like it isn't English anymore. You couldn't call London English. It's like, you've got like a Chinese, like your Chinatown and stuff. You've got like your Muslim Quarter. You've got your there's so many different regions and parts of it that are all just kind of split up, and it's like, you can go for a walk in London, and it feels totally alien because there's hardly any white people at all. And I'm not one of these racial supremacist characters or anything like that. I'm not like one of these, oh yeah, I'm proud to be white or
You
anything
will
like
be
that. Not,
soon.
but it's weird to feel like a foreigner in my own country, and that is the capital. And it's like, what was it? I was on a bus, and the entire bus was just nothing but Indian people. And again, I've nothing against them. It's fine, but none of them were like speaking English at all. They were all speaking like Indian, and it was such a culture shock, is what it was. And yeah, it's weird. I think London is no longer majority white, which is strange.
I think that's true. I
It's
think it just passed like a 60% non-white.
yeah, yeah, and some cities in the UK are like that as well. I think Birmingham is quite typical for that. But and again, there's multiculturalism is fine, so long as it's kind of so long as you've got the infrastructure and it's handled correctly, so that the people coming in assimilate to the laws of the land essentially, and the principles and beliefs. Because if you have them all self-segregating and creating their own kind of quarters, you end up with criminal elements, and you see that with places like Chinatown, where you have triads and whatnot, and you see that with even with like Europeans and stuff. Like if you've got like a mass influx of Italians and stuff, you can end up with like mafia and whatnot taking
Right.
over. And with Haitians and stuff, you get Haitian gangs with and it's just lots of people all kind of self-segregating because there's no real integration going on, and it's we've had a bit of that with the UK in terms of uh, in Scotland with Polish people, like Polish people coming in on mass, and I think a lot of people were kind of like, oh, they took our jobs, kind of thing. And it's like, come on, do you really want to work in a factory? It's like that's not a typical job that anyone wants to work. You know, they're just doing it so they can just get a whack load of money, and then they can go back home and sort of like double their what they've earned, essentially after a couple of years or something.
Yeah.
Because it was all part of the EU and everything, and so there was like an open borders essentially thing on the go there. But yeah, I think like when it comes to like population densities and people coming and going, it's like you've got to kind of effectively manage that to an extent. I'm not saying that you have to take extreme measures like that China would do, because I mean that's totalitarian, and same with I don't know if it's the same with like many Islam countries, because they actually tend to be quite pro globalism to an extent, so long as you surrender to Islam and become like a Muslim and stuff, you're fine. But even if you're not a Muslim, all you have to do is pay an extra tax, which is bizarre. How bizarre is that?
Well,
Like
it's tolerant in a way.
it kind of is, and it's like we should be actually kind of implementing something similar, But people would be like, oh, that's xenophobic. You can't do that, and it's like, well, it's like it's a privilege to become a citizen, and you've got to kind of earn that. Otherwise, if you take it for granted, then you're not going to appreciate it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Is if you earn something, then it has more value and more worth. Whereas if it's just handed to you, you tend not to appreciate it. You tend to take it entirely for granted.
Well, yeah, people don't have much. They don't have ownership in their own country, right? They have no stake in it. And you see it, with Mexicans in the U.S. Most of them are sending half their paycheck back to Mexico, right? So obviously they have no stake in the U.S., right? They don't care about how the U.S.'s economy is doing. They don't care about, they're just going to drain that money from the U.S. because they have no cultural connection. They have no loyalty, right? This is just a means to an end for them.
Yeah, and the whole thing's become politicized anyway because like it's become a game of tug of war, and it's like the Democrats are using it to sort of like influence their own voter base, and we see that over here in Scotland as well. What they've done is they've allowed people who are non-citizens to vote, so they
That's
can vote in
wonderful.
elections. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? So if you're like a student and you're studying over here, you get to vote.
Okay, well, that's just ridiculous. At
Like, I
least we
mean,
haven't
could you
gotten
see
that
that in
far.
any other country?
No, you don't see it in any other country, and I mean the concept of a country is almost falling apart, right? If you don't have if you can just vote, if you're not a citizen, if you can just walk, like if borders just don't exist, then well, what is a country, right? It doesn't have it's beginning to lose all meaning.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is to do with the people who are essentially in power, because a lot of these people are kind of disconnected from Joe Blogs on the street. They tend to look down on them more often than not. They demonize the right, who they see as the working class and everything. They go, oh yeah, all these dole scum and these people who just live their life on benefits and everything. Oh yeah, they're terrible and whatnot. And it's like, you know, what do you think the people who come into this country are doing? Like the immigrants and stuff. Like a lot of them are, you know, like not immigrants, but like economic migrants. A lot of them will just come over, surf over here, and they'll on a floating door or whatever, and they'll say, it's like, oh, give me benefits and everything. They'll just become a part of the system because there's all these what is it, immigration groups and everything that say, okay, here's all the boxes you need to tick, and you need to say that oh, I'm seeking political asylum because I'm homosexual and I came from an Islamic country where it's like, so you can't return me, so it would be a death sentence to otherwise let me go. So they get straight onto the benefit system and they get put up in hotels, and it's not even like cheap hotels; it's like luxury hotels. They end up getting put in, and the whole system's just absolutely crazy because they care more about optics, the optics of each situation, and it's like, well, we're doing this, and we're doing this, in order so they can get voted again, because that's their, as soon as they get voted, it's like, oh well, easy street, and then as soon as they retire, it's like they effectively, it's like getting promoted, but dissolving all your responsibilities at the same time.
Right.
So you get a massive pay rise as soon as you resign. Uh, you get a massive pay rise, and then you don't have to work anymore. How mad is that? So all these people, are career politicians, just come in and they do whatever's good for optics, so they can just get their own payday system.
And what you talk about with the disconnect, right? You said you ride the bus and you're the only white person on the bus, and that
That was
gives
just in
you,
London.
well, right. But just being in that situation, it gives you a sense of like alienation, and like you don't have it's sort of, I don't know, it's like emotionally distressing, right? I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating it, but I think, you'd say the same to a black kid who went to an all-white school, right? He would have no sense of belonging. Whereas the people that are allowing this to happen never have to deal with that, right? And I would assume that none of the people pushing for an open borders policy are riding the bus. They don't have to see that. They don't have to be in that situation. Same way in the U.S. here, all of these, your celebrities, your open border celebrities, they all live in their gated communities. They don't have to deal with crime. The crime rate wherever they live is non-existent, and They
Yeah,
don't.
it's almost like they become hateful of their own communities and they want to create new communities. And it's like, oh, look at all the new things we're creating. Look at all this, oh, this is all beautiful and everything. And it's just like, and anyone who doesn't like all this new things are evil bigots and they're xenophobic and whatnot. And it's like, and they're just demonizing all the people who essentially got them into power in the first place.
Right.
The people that they're supposed to represent. Instead, they're representing, floods of new people that are coming in that, they, that, you know, they're just appealing to that new bigger group because they're depending on their votes now. And you see this with London because of what is it, the mayor Sadiq Khan? He's he's very much what is it? He was banning women in swimsuits
Oh
ads
yeah.
on the subway and everything, to appease the Muslim demographic. And it's just like, hold on, hold on. What's happened to British culture?
Right.
What's happened to, the the country that all these principles and everything else, kind of, and it's like, there's all these population demographics, and it's like it's cultural demographics that are kind of going on. Because I mean, people aren't racist. It's like, oh, yeah, you've got a different skin color, so what does that matter? It doesn't make a difference, but it does when you've got, cultures that are going to clash, and then it creates animosity and it creates all this sort of like negative feedback because all these people coming in who want to change the rules in the system, they see people, because what they do is they have like effective like what is it, police and vice of virtue that is done by local like what is it, mosques, like the local mosques and stuff. They'll have like people who sort of like go around and patrol their own communities, and if they see someone who's out drinking, they'll go and they'll beat them up, and they'll say it's like, yeah, that's degenerate behavior because it goes against Islam. And they'll sort of like, they form gangs and things. What is it, if there's like any Jewish people in the community, they'll go out and they'll harass them continuously, with all the anti-Semitism. And that's been a huge problem with what is it, the Labour Party in the UK, because they've been appealing so much to the Muslim demographic. They've actually taken on principles that are anti-Israel and
And
anti-Jewish.
and you can probably tell me if this is true or not, but I've also heard
Mhm.
the Muslim communities, as far as like the young women, if they're ever seen with a non-Muslim man, they'll just beat the shit out of that man right within an inch of his life, and then say, don't go come anywhere near our women, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, right, a lot of these incidents and events and things will be isolated incidents. They'll maybe happen like once or twice or whatever, but it's like, it's representative of a bigger cultural shift and all these changes taking place. Because I mean, I'm not saying it's like, we need to get them all out and stuff. I'm just saying it's like, it's something that's worth discussing. It's worth talking about, because at the end of the day, nobody wants xenophobia. No one wants animosity. We want to sort of like, we want to sort of like come together as communities. We want to sort of like, essentially live and let live. Everyone wants to sort of like form a cohesive kind of structure. But when you introduce all these like different demographics and everything, and all these different cultural elements all at the same time, and there's no effort to sort of like try and bridge them together, um, it can create problems, and it can create all these unique crimes. Like what is it? Um, what is it? Acid attacks are a thing now. Like I think there's been like I think there's been over a dozen acid attacks in London where folks are like going around and they're throwing vials of, I think it was like kids on mopeds and stuff were going around with acid vials, and they were like throwing them on women's faces and things to horrendous, like sulfuric acid,
Yeah.
in order to you know um, make them horrendously burned. And I think that depending on how well the shot is and stuff, they can go blind and things and can suffer like brain damage and everything. It's just horrendous. And of course they're horribly disfigured as well. And it's like that was never a problem before. And it's the same with like terrorist attacks and everything. That was never a massive problem before. And it's like, as soon as these sort of like cultural shifts occur, we start to see all these unique kind of problems occurring. And it's like because there's been no effort in order to address these cultural shifts. But again, we're kind of shifting away from the whole original topic here, in terms of like the religious suicide killings and what was it as well? There was something else that you wanted to go on. It was like people who die horrendous deaths.
Well, let's say violent
Brutal
death,
deaths.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that this is tied into this concept of ritual suicide, and that, well, there's a gray area here, right? So, and this is a good example somebody else brought up. So if you have, your small village, right, is being besieged by a large army, and your choice is either surrender or fight to the death, well, you're not necessarily, committing suicide, but there's the strong, almost inevitable possibility of death. And so by choosing to fight, right, you are, you are coming to terms with a violent death. And I mean, I think would you argue that there's no nobility in that there's nothing good inherently in that situation?
I think there can be. I mean, there's definitely power in self-sacrifice. Like if you go into a burning building and you go there to sort of like rescue other people, I think there can be meaning in all sorts of things. It's you've sort of like you've risked your own life in order to help others. Like if you there's someone else sort of like crossing the road or whatever, and they're about to be hit by a truck. If you push them out of the way and to your own self detriment, then yeah, I think that's a powerful thing, which is the power of self sacrifice. But in terms of like dying a brutal death, I think sometimes it can be meaningless, and other times it can be it can have significant meaning. But again, it depends on it's circumstantial. It can depend on the situation and the rationale behind it.
Right, and so I guess ultimately with this discussion, I just want to consider, an idea. I guess, we sort of look down as a society. We look at, jihadists, or even, your Tibetan self-immolators. We say that they're crazy, or brainwashed, or and in some cases, like the jihadis, they very well could be, right? But I think, if you really have such a strong belief, such a strong conviction that it is more important than your life, I think that we can see that there's nobility in that there's something good there's, even if we disagree with the morality, right, we can respect the conviction. We can respect that a person has this much faith in something beyond themselves. I don't know. What do you think about that?
So you're right, yeah. Yeah, because it's certainly again it depends on the rationale behind it. Is like, did it come from a good place? Did it come from like religious conviction? Did it come from personal conviction? Was it like an act of, is it a result of their own delusions? Is it there's so many other factors to kind of consider. So if you've got like a specific example or anything, then we can kind of, hone in on that.
Well, I think about what you say with the circumstances is it is very hard to say whether something is blanket good or blanket bad unless you know the circumstances, and I think it's very much circumstance dependent, right?
Absolutely.
Because let's talk about something like January 6th, right? Obviously, you know everything that happened there, right?
No, I don't. So I would appreciate if you could give me a summary of it, because I only know like fragmented parts of it.
Uh, wow, that's actually pretty interesting to me. That I guess it's not as big of a deal worldwide as it is in America, but
Oh no, it's definitely a big deal and everything. But again, there's so many narratives on it. You know,
right,
like AOC, she'll spew out one narrative, and the mainstream media will spew out one narrative, and like our uh, media over here is very similar to like the CNN and everything because we've got like the BBC News, the Guardian, and a few other um, leftist rags and stuff that just completely pervert the narrative and to say it's like oh yes, and it's all because of Trump and all this and that, and it's just like and it's like no, he kind of said don't do anything. If you want to be respectful or stay at home, just you can still exercise your rights and everything, but do it peacefully. And you know um but again, the MSM narrative will go a completely different direction that is obfuscates the truth. So I'm more interested in your perspective because I think it's going to be a lot more honest and true as opposed to fake news.
uh, well, I watched it happen live, so all of my knowledge of it comes from. I mean, I was literally watching it on video, right? uh, so well, what happened was, yeah, it starts off as just a protest outside the Capitol, trying to get some overturning of the election results, and what really happened, I mean, people were getting more and more vocal, and then what they did was they opened the doors. Like people just kept banging the doors of the Capitol. I mean, they weren't like physically, they didn't have a battering ram, right? They weren't laying siege to it, but they were sort of banging on the doors, and then eventually the security's just like, all right, just let them in. So they open the doors, and I mean, you can see videos of this, the people just walking inside the Capitol, taking pictures and saying, okay, we have this I mean, it was a statement, right? And for the most part, it was a peaceful protest. I mean, there was a couple broken windows, I guess, but there was not a single casualty. Well, the only casualty was Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by the Capitol Police. So she was a protester. But that's all of this is what was seen, right? What was seen on video.
Yeah.
And initial opinion of it, right? As a person who I guess agrees with the motives of these people, is it's a very good thing, right? It's a very good thing that these people let their voices be heard and made a statement in such a way.
Mm-hmm.
But then, right, it comes out that you have a lot of federal law enforcement that played a large hand in this, instigating and possibly even coordinating the storming of the Capitol for weeks in advance, right? And this totally changes, it should change your perspective of it, right? Like you can agree with the overall idea and say, okay, there were good-hearted people here that were doing what they believed were correct, but there were also bad actors that were trying to lead people into doing something to their own detriment. And I think you can view religious extremism in the same light, right? You have some people who are true believers, some people that think that what they're doing is correct for a truly moral purpose, and then you have other people who are being manipulative and trying to take advantage of those people for a nefarious purpose. So I
Yeah.
guess that's ultimately where I wanted to go with that analogy.
Well, just to add to what you were saying about the January 6th, what I have heard and I've seen footage of as well is that it was actually it was undercover FBI that were trying to get into the building, and there was footage of it of a couple of guys, and the crowd was actually stood away from the doors, and it was just these two guys who were like attacking, and they were like punching and kicking the doors at one point, and it turned out that those two people were, you turn the lights off and you can see them in the dark, essentially. So yeah, these people were, and apparently there was a terrorist plot and something as well that was trying to be organized or something by the FBI, and it turned out, well, it wasn't by the FBI, but it was essentially by them, because what it was there was a couple of people that they thought might do some terrorist damage, and so there was two. I think it was like four people in total that came in a van. Two of them were FBI agents, and apparently the most part of the organizing and getting the whole thing together of this terrorist plot, as it were, most of the organization and planning and implementation of it was done by the FBI agents that were undercover,
Right.
which just seems absolutely bizarre.
And I think what you're referring to is actually what I brought up earlier, the plot to kidnap the governor. So that happened a few
Oh,
months before the Capitol, and
right.
there's about 10 guys involved with this, and 5 of them were FBI agents.
Yeah, that's nuts. Yeah,
And
it's just like, what the hell's going on here? It's like, and this is how the FBI are able to create all these stings and arrests and everything, and it's like, it's just nuts. It's like, how much of it is actually the FBI doing it, so they can like bump up their arrest records to say it's like, oh yeah, we caught all these guys and everything, and it's like, but you guys did have the organization and planning yourselves. It's like, at what point does it actually? Because I mean, I know like beat cops and everything, whenever they're undercover, it's like they have to be so careful, because it's like because it can be classed as entrapment, and that's essentially what the FBI's bread and butter seems to be
oh yeah,
for all these undercover agents. Is that it more often than not, it's entrapment rather than actually stopping a crime. They're creating the crime so they can say, "Hey, look, we stopped a crime that we created." It's madness. I don't get it. But again, very hard to find all these videos and evidence, because they seem to get taken down offline very quickly.
yeah. Funny how that works. Uh,
Yeah,
but I mean, and I think we could say that this goes beyond just trying to bump up their own numbers, but it's obviously politically motivated. I mean, now you have. I mean, they consider, white supremacist domestic terror is the greatest terror threat in America now, according to, the FBI. So, what is the purpose of that? I mean, is anybody being made safer by us targeting our own citizens? No, it just means, uh, yeah, actually, Siddhartha just commented. He says they don't trap BLM rioters too often, right? So why aren't they entrapping, these people who are actually, performing acts of terror? It's very one-sided political persecution, and they're trying to, demonize these right-wingers, cast them as the new terror threat, the new enemy.
yeah. I think it's unfair to classify them as BLM rioters, because it's more often than not it's Antifa that seem to be the radical actors in many of these situations that are that tend to actually be organized. And what they do, and what I've seen footage of and everything, is that they'll order pallets of like bricks and things to certain locations so they can use them as weapons to throw at police and create riots. And they have like all these cheat sheets and everything. You know, it's kind of like the something that's akin to the anarchist cookbook, where they have all these sheets and everything on how to make makeshift riot shields and makeshift weapons and everything like this, so that they can go in and they can antagonize and create all this division and rift, and then they and it's fantastic because it's like you see some of them and how they act, and I've seen it where it's like as well. It was caught on camera, and it was quite an interesting case where there was like a whole BLM protest going on, and I think there was like one Antifa person that was trying to stoke the flames and increase the situation, and all the BLM protesters all turned on them and they said, "They're not with us, they're not with us," and they went and pushed them out of the whole protest and everything because they could see them that they were trying to turn it into a violent protest, like into an actual. They were trying to riot, and I think that's what tends to happen is like they get all these groups of people, and if they tend to be kind of younger or thuggish type people who are most likely already involved in crimes, that's easy to do. But if they're actual genuine protesters, you haven't got a hope of rallying them into some kind of a riot. So yeah, it's and I'm not saying like that BLM is completely guilt free or anything. They are. I think BLM as an organization has a lot to answer for, especially with their what is it, their manifesto, where they were saying they wanted to destroy the nuclear family. It's like, excuse me, what are you trying to do here? And it is basically Marxism. I mean, the leader of BLM was a self-proclaimed communist, and what was it, that whole fiasco with the four mansions and stuff as well, and then decided to leave after they'd gotten all that money. The whole thing is just, it's just a massive grift, and it was done on an international level because like over here you couldn't escape the whole BLM movement or Antifa or the much of the things that's been happening here. It's just crazy because it's like we don't even have major gun crimes or anything over here. It's just not a thing, and we don't have major cases where like black people are unfairly treated by the police or anything. It's just not a thing. But we saw echoes of it all happening over here, and that speaks to a much larger level of organization and planning. The fact that we would get those sorts of movements and causes happening, across the pond.
Yeah, and let's go back to what you said about Antifa, right? If these are the majority of the instigative actors, they're not doing this quietly, right? It's pretty out in the open, to the point where if the FBI did give a shit, how easy would it be to lock up any one of these people, entrap them into something, entrap them into some kind of terror plot to kill a right-wing governor. I think it would be child's play, right? But you don't see that happening, and it shows that the Antifa, the BLM, it's very much supported by the system.
Yeah, and you can actually you tend to see this happening in a lot of covert ops and everything. Is they'll hide in the crowd. If there's any glowies or whatever, they'll just they'll use that to sort of like instrument and implement their own people to fire through their own agenda, because they can operate completely under the radar to fire off their own motivations and efforts.
Yeah, and also to get back to the original point though is there's still like not everybody is a glowy, right? Not everybody
No,
has been.
all you need is just a couple of people, like a couple of actors, in order to sort of like steer the direction, because it's it becomes a herd mentality.
Right. But that does mean that you do have true believers out there, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, this might get me in trouble, right? But I'll say, do I agree with the plot to kidnap the governor? No, but I agree with the political reasons that they had in mind that justified their plot to kidnap the governor, right? So it's like how I I guess I just mean the overall situation is not good, but the motivation for the situation is good, right? So in the same way, like if a person is, let's even do a pretty I don't know, a person is, well, let's go back to our old examples, right? So we have a jihadi who is, forced into it via, some terror splinter cell that pumps him full of drugs, right? So that act
Well,
that's not.
again, I don't think it's right to say they're forced into it. They're radicalized. I think it's the correct terminology to use there, because they are convinced. They're not necessarily they're convinced, and it's still coercion, but they're not forced into it. They're still the independent actor at the end of the day.
Okay, I guess that changes things even further, right?
Mhm.
Because I think you can say, the overall situation and the circumstances are not good, but this principle of, putting, faith in God above your own life is good, in my opinion. You might disagree with that, but that's why I would say that, there's certain cases where, I think from a purely philosophical perspective, there is nobility in, this suicide attacking. And I think that's a really unoptical thing to say, but I think I'm sort of
Right.
justifying it.
Yeah, I think I need to be extremely generous with what you're saying here, and charitable, because I think I know what you're trying to get at, and
Yeah.
you're not, and you're just saying you're using all the wrong words at the moment, right? What you're trying to say is martyrdom, right?
Yes.
When someone dies for the result of a goal, and the easiest case point scenario is folks like Jesus, who were crucified and everything, spawned a whole massive, I mean, that just blew up the whole idea of Christianity. Um, not all at once, but like it started that movement, because I don't even think they called themselves Christians until I think it was like 300 years later or something. Um,
I'm not sure.
yeah, you need to speak to someone like what is it? Based Hammer of God, is it, or Black Hammer of God?
Yeah, he would definitely know.
Yeah, he's very much clued in on all that side of things. He's pretty much the expert, the resident expert, as it were. But yeah, and I would say you're spot on there with martyrdom. And I think a good case in point scenario, if you want to if you ever want to need to provide a non-religious icon in that regard that's got similar situation to Jesus, then you just Spartacus, like that's probably the best example, because he was like a gladiator that created a revolutionary movement and whatnot through violence when he wanted to free all the slaves, and then he was crucified for it. And yeah, it was a massive. It was a very interesting and compelling story, but most people tend to lean towards the story of Jesus, because again, it spawned an entire religious movement that's kind of more kind of prevalent now today, especially in its influence globally.
Um,
But yeah, I think like martyrs can speak so much more in terms of volumes. I can't think of many other examples though offhand.
well, let's look at another secular example that, once again, I think most people would agree is a very noble death. Well, in World War II, I think it was CIA agents. They were given cyanide pills, right? So it's like you fall into enemy hands and they're torturing you for information. You take the pill, right? You kill yourself to avoid giving up any kind of intelligence. And I don't know if there's any documented cases of anybody actually being in that situation and taking the pill, but I think most people would agree that that is the nobler option, right? You're putting faith in your country, faith in your people above your own life, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can argue in the case of war and everything that war by itself is actually politically motivated for the most part. I mean, that's more so prevalent nowadays in terms of the Afghanistan and Iran Iraq wars. Like most of those wars tend to be over resources rather than specifically ideological leanings. I mean, I think the Vietnam War uh, was weirdly ideological in some constraints because it was meant to be a war against communism. But again, that's Vietnam's been a war ground for many centuries. It's where the book comes from. What was it? The Heart of Darkness. I don't know if you've ever read that one. It's
No,
what
I've heard it's very good though.
yeah, there's been several movie adaptations of it. The most famous one being Apocalypse Now, which was set in a more modern setting because I think the book's originally set in the early 1800s or something. Good book though, well worth reading, and it's not the heaviest of reads, but it's one that gets the old noggin jogging.
Um, and so I just came up with another example that
Mm-hmm.
just kind of shows that I think people are, I don't know, I think people are actually not anti uh, like suicide bombing. They're just anti-Muslim, right? And here's another example. Have you seen the Star Wars movies?
Yes, I have.
So did you see the? I didn't watch the most recent one, but I remember the second to last one. I didn't like the movie at all, but
Yeah, it was
but
trash.
but the end of the movie had the female character. I don't even know her name, but she like kamikazes their ship into the enemy star destroyer, right? And
Yeah,
she's the big hero. Like that was the climax of the movie. This valiant sacrifice. And how is that any different than a Japanese kamikaze or a jihadist suicide bomber? It's really not. It's just that she had the correct motive, right? Uh, so it's not that people are against the concept of a ritual suicide. Is that they're against the justification, if that makes sense.
yeah, and I think some of the justifications for that whole death and everything were kind of marred because of the whole. It wasn't a well written film that at all. It was. I think it was trying to pander to too many different voices and everything, and the guy who wrote it, I think it was something Ryan or something or Ryan Ritchie or
Yeah.
I don't know the guy's name, but he was absolutely terrible. He had no idea. He was well out of his depth. I think the closest to another sci-fi film that he'd done was the film Looper, and that film made no sense. It was just a complete mishmash, and it actually broke the fourth wall as well. It said, oh yeah, don't think about it too much. It's just have fun. With the whole ideas of creating paradoxes and how time works. So yeah, there was no real sort of like internal logic there or consistency, because he's like, what was it? I think he's getting tortured at one point, and he starts scarring his own arm in order to send a message to himself in the future. But he would have always had that scar. It wouldn't just suddenly appear on his arm. You know,
Well,
there
I
was
don't
no
know. That's
internal
the
logic there.
paradox. Who knows?
Yeah, it's but yeah, I think a lot of people play fast and loose with that those kind of concepts, because they are, logical fallacies, as it were. But the yeah, I think like in terms of like ritualistic suicide and everything, I think we've kind of covered all the heavy examples, and I think you know I think in terms of ritual suicide, I think that's definitely, we could probably both agree it's a bad thing. But martyrdom, uh, you know, is almost like transcending to some extent, and that is like transformative and tends to deliver something that's larger than the sum of its parts. It tends to be about self-sacrifice as opposed to um, suicide.
But
Because suicide is ultimately a selfish act, whereas martyrdom is about doing something that's greater than yourself.
well, I guess that's my question: is where do we draw the line between the two, and is it a hard line or a soft line?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'd say that's contestable, and you would have to do it on a case by case basis, really. Because again, when it comes to war, that's that can go down the political quagmire because of how wars are more often than not influenced. It's that can sort of like put a dampener as to people's motivations, because more often than not, people who fight in wars aren't doing it for the good of the aren't doing it for political reasons. They're doing it for the good of their own family. For the good of preserving their own culture. It's not usually politically motivated, but the war itself can be politically motivated. So that kind of muddies the waters. But if you're doing something purely out of protest, that can have much a much more powerful message, like in the case of the suicide monk,
Well,
where he
and
committed
I would say that
self-mutilation.
that is definitely the monk, right? I would say that that's a ritual suicide. Would you not?
Uh, again, it's self-sacrifice, isn't it? He did it out of protest, so I think it's like when you do the whole, and again, it can also be perceived as suicide as well. It's an odd one. It's very odd.
Uh,
I guess we would have to sort of like go into the etymology of the language and say, it's like, well, um, is suicide in of itself a good thing? And it's like, well, probably not, but because it has all these negative connotations around it, whereas martyrdom does have like a lot more positive connotations around it, because you're dying for the sake of a larger goal.
right, but I guess the what separates ritual suicide from just suicide, that ritual aspect implies some, uh, like we said, religious, traditional, or in some cases, national, cultural motivation, right? Which means it's sort of the implication there is that it's not selfish.
Yeah, but and again, it's like, it depends on coercement and stuff. If people are compelled to do it, through not of a choice of their own, essentially. Like in the case of like the Aztecs or anything, they're cutting out people's hearts. They were ultimately doing that, I believe, for the sake of getting a good harvest and a good crop to come forth. So it would bring the rains from the gods in the heavens. They would sacrifice that person, and I don't believe it was willingly. I don't think people willingly say, you know what, just I'll take one for the team. Just cut out my heart, for the sake of the god. Be a great show and tell. Everyone will love it. It's like, I'll take that bullet. I don't think many people were voluntarily going in for that. So yeah, that's definitely sacrifice, and not of the self. That's definitely coerced, and I think we can absolutely hands down agree not a good thing.
And then my argument is that if it is coerced, then it is not suicide. It's
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
sort of, I would call it murder with extra steps.
Definitely, yeah. You're spot on there, man. But also, so I think we've kind of covered all the humane aspects of it and the philosophical aspects, and so I wanted to kind of cover the biological aspects. If you're interested in delving into that at all.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because there's many creatures in nature that actually do have suicide attacks. And probably the most obvious example would be bees. When bees sting people, they kill themselves in the process because they can't just pull out the sting. They ultimately die in the process. And bees are like an evolution of ants. And ants tend to have like suicide bombers and stuff as well, where there are actual species of ants which do actually literally explode. What they do is they go into the enemy ants' nests tunnels, they burrow themselves in, and then they what is they've got like a ring around the abdomen, uh, and what is it contains one chemical and then they mix it with another chemical in their bodies, which causes the chemical reaction and causes them to explode, collapsing all the tunnels and effectively burying alive the enemy nest. So yeah, we do see like the case of suicide bombers and attackers in nature, and it's done for the good of the rest of the hive collective. So it's almost like utilitarianism is actually a factor and actually a natural occurring element.
And it's interesting because I think you also sort of have to ask yourself, like, what do we consider an organism, right? And I think we sort of, like when it comes to animals, right? We see, okay, this one individual bee, it has its own brain, its own heart, right? It's an individual organism. Whereas with something like a forest or like some like very large fungi, right? The roots and everything could be so interconnected that they consider it a single organism, right? And there's a few cases of this, some forests and some like mushroom patches that they say are, like thousands of miles, like a single large organism. And I think, when it comes to the bees, you could sort of consider it in a very similar fashion, right? Because I believe that most bees that you'll see, I don't think they're fertile. They can't reproduce. So if you're an organism, right, part of the thing that makes you a living thing is the ability to reproduce. So this bee on its own is sort of kind of meaningless, right? It doesn't really have a life per se outside of the hive, right? So the hive is almost the organism, right? The collection of all of these bees, we can call it the single organism. And so in that sense, right, I guess I don't know where exactly I'm going with this, more so to say that can we relate this analogy? Could we say that a human society could work the same way, right? That the individual person does not take that much precedence, right? That we would do something for the benefit of the entire organism, which I guess you might say, is utilitarian in a certain sense.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. It's like because I mean, like when it comes to hives, they depend very much on a hierarchical structure in order to exist, and it depends very much on that cooperation. And I could really go into the nerdier aspects of the entomology and how the ants specifically work and how they function and work as a cohesive group. But I don't think there's any real sense in that, to be honest. But it is a fun topic that I enjoy. I love talking about it anyway. But to move away from that and move back to the individuality versus the group aspect here, we're going straight back into left and right politics. Because again, it's like the right believes very much in the individual, whereas the left believes very much in the group. And it's like, the left would most likely trend more so towards the utilitarian argumentation because it benefits what, because they're always going to believe in that consequentialist um, ethos, which prioritizes the good of the group over the needs of the individual, whereas the right essentially want to give everyone the same rights so that every individual is respected. I mean, am I wrong? Am I wrong there, or?
Um, well, I'd say it's. I think there's multiple spectrums, right? Because I think there's plenty of far right people who are actually more group oriented, and then you also have your libertarian socialists like Vaush, right? So I don't know if left versus right is the exact right paradigm, but there definitely is a paradigm there, right? The individualistic versus collective.
And I'm wondering, right, because you just made me think of this just now. It's like the political axis as we see it on a 2D perspective where it's just a cross. But if you imagine that as on a sphere, where it's like the left and the right are one axis, and the libertarian and authoritarian are in another axis, so it's two hoops that just loop right round. I think that's probably a better way of seeing it. So it's like you end up like on different poles, and it like the extreme left and the extreme right both seem to connect really heavily together, and we see this constantly occurring with governments as well. Like you said, like with the Engels and fascism and the whole idea of communism and everything, they like when it comes to those sort of like government structures, the whole left and right extreme dynamics seem to match up perfectly. Like when it comes to the extremes, so it's like they almost there's like crossover there. That's kind of bizarre.
Well, and it's
And
also and as far as like freedom versus authority, well, we're at the point where the people who are most authoritarian believe that they're the most centered on freedom because they're sort of
yeah,
they're forcing you to be free in a sense.
so if you go far enough right, you end up becoming far left.
Right.
And if you go far enough authoritarian, you end up an extreme liberal, because ultimately you want the most possible freedom by becoming the biggest authority, so you get access to all freedoms. Yeah, it's kind of bizarre, isn't it?
And I think, well, this is the sort of thing that we have abandoned that I think was more prevalent in, probably the height of European society, your like 15, 16, 1700s. I think you have this idea of the individual within the collective. I mean, sort of a synthesis between these two extremes. Because you do need to protect individuality, but to what end? So you need to have some sort of collective goal, right? What is your society aspiring to that the individual wants to to self-actualize in a way, right? So unless you clearly have a defined goal, which I think is the importance of, a strong, you could say socialist, right? You need to have some national identity, some national morality that is going to shape, what it means to be an individual. Because otherwise, you're just saying, the individual is free to, like, be degenerate, like do drugs, like is that true freedom? No, I think it would be the freedom to self-actualize, to obtain some sort of meaning of your own in life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think it was like a Muslim philosopher who once said, the fight for freedom is but an illusion because it's merely the fight to choose the shackles of which you bind yourself with. And ultimately, that's what everyone's fighting for. Is like, it's like, no, my system's best, kind of thing. And so everyone's busy fighting over the chains of which to, constrain themselves with ultimately. And so like this whole fight for freedom that everyone wants is always going to be a constant struggle, and we're just fighting over different rule sets of which to say, oh, no, 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 this makes us more free. But
Uh,
yeah, it's bizarre.
and I think freedom as a concept, I mean, it's sort of entirely meaningless because I'd say on every sort of freedom issue, uh, both sides are arguing for freedom, right? Like if you think of
Yeah,
something like pronouns, the one side is like, well, I want the freedom to call you whatever I want and not go to jail. Well, the other side says, well, I want the freedom to not have to be traumatized by what you call me, right? Or like guns, I want the freedom to own a gun, whereas the other person say, I want the freedom to not have to dodge bullets in a school, right? So both
exactly.
both
Yeah,
sides are arguing for freedom to the point where it's like, well, does freedom have any meaning whatsoever?
yeah, and I think I think you've hit a major nail on the head there in terms of philosophy, because um, it really does matter as to how free we are, because even like the freedom of speech in America comes with caveats. You're still not allowed the freedom to um, what is it the what is it the you're not allowed to calls to violence or calls to action. But isn't that what the whole Constitution was founded on? Like the whole idea of the right to bear arms and everything. It's like is the right to call to arms and action against the government. So if you don't have that right to call to action, then you can't. The whole balance and check system of holding your government in check is kind of destroyed.
Uh, and then the whole idea of, like anarcho-capitalists, right? They believe in absolute freedom, but then you actually just end up back to not having freedom because there's nobody to enforce your freedom, right? So it's like
Yeah,
the paradox is like you need to restrict freedom to have freedom. It's a very paradoxical concept.
and something I love as a term is the Wild West, because you can just say it's like, well, the internet at the moment is in a state of like it's very much the new frontier. It's the new Wild West.
Well, it
But we
was.
don't have all these constrictions and stuff, like, because we can look at places like China where there are all these constrictions and constraints as to what you can and cannot post, and we're kind of given carte blanche in so many regards, except from specific political platforms or just uh, what is it, software platforms like your Facebook, your Twitter, or whatever. They set their own rules and policies, but you've always got the choice to go to a different platform in order to have freedom of communication and talk and interact with people.
Well, for now, we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see when they can start shutting down every platform. But I mean, I would definitely
Yeah.
agree. I would say, 10 years ago, that is exactly what the internet was. It really was the Wild West, and that you saw such a variety of ideas, and there really was no censorship, and it was very, um, I don't know, I don't want to say cutthroat, but it was like if you couldn't be fragile, right? Um,
Oh yeah.
Whereas now it's becoming increasingly, uh, it's a monitored space, right? It's becoming increasingly not the Wild West. It's the, you know,
My safe space.
yeah, it's
You seen
it's
that episode of South Park?
yeah, I think I did.
Classic.
Um,
Yeah. I'm just reading what Chungus Reloaded's writing in the chat, and he's saying nothing will change until the supply chain collapses and these fat Americans don't have their cheeseburgers and McFlurries. Then the guns come out. And I think it's a funny anecdote and stuff to say, but I think it's something that we're kind of seeing now, with the rise of diabetes and people affecting their own health to the what is it like we're exposed to all these addictive substances like sugar and fatty foods and starches and everything that are really pile on the pounds, and people have next to no self-control or agency in some regards. And so there's all this talk of because diabetes is such a major epidemic and heart disease, they want to introduce things like sugar taxes. And I think we're probably going to be the first to roll it out in Scotland, because our National Health Service kind of depends on it. But yeah, I'm wondering how much of a revolution that would be in America, because with all these kind of if they were to introduce these legislations and everything, it'd have to be so gradual so as to you know make it as you know to curb any kind of resistance. And I think that's the way you sort out all these problems, is you just make the changes so small and so minuscule and gradual that everyone's just like, it's just, that's just the latest thing. It's not much of a change from what it was before. Because that's what we've done in terms of Scotland with the smoking ban, because we have a public smoking ban. Like if you're outside and stuff, or if you're in your own house or anything, you can smoke as much as you like or whatnot. But we've got in public places like bars, restaurants, and just in any sort of like most workplaces and everything, you cannot smoke indoors. You either have to have like designated smoking areas where you like go out on the porch or something. And you can smoke there. As well as what they've done is they've introduced all this what was it, advertising and stuff. It's like public things on the cigarettes, so it shows you like what was it, diseased lungs on the actual box of the cigarettes, or like what was it, like eye cancer and things, and all the stuff that you can get to act as a preventative measure. So it's like they've introduced that as a kind of mandate, as well as you can't actually see cigarettes that are for sale. They're hidden behind one of those, what is it they call them? It's like shutters. There's like a shutter, and they have to be concealed. You cannot actually see cigarettes. So there's no advertising of cigarette either on any television or channel, and you can't actually visibly see them in the store. And they have to be like, they're sold behind the counter, so you have to request the brand and the make. It's just and we've done that by degrees,
right.
slowly, over a period of years. But it's much to the benefit of everyone's health. But it is kind of totalitarian. If they were to do all that all at once, everyone would have kicked up a major fuss. They would have been like, I'm throwing all the toys out the pram. I'm flipping all the tables here. This is an outrage. You slags. How dare you? Bloody government. Give me back my freedoms. I need my cigarettes.
They call it
You know?
boiling the frog, right?
Yeah, essentially. But yeah, and I'm a firm believer of the gradual introduction and incorporation of things like that to the benefit of society. Because again, like the whole idea and the history of cigarettes and how they were introduced was that they were originally promoted by the government as and prescribed by doctors as a form of stress relief. And they used to give them out. I think it was like during World War II, to all the soldiers, to help steady their shots and their aims when they were firing bullets and things. And yeah, it was prescribed as a relaxant, but nowadays, obviously, we know all the health complications and issues that can occur with it, and we're probably going to see similar things coming into effect with other forms of drugs and medications. The trouble is that the pharmaceutical companies or whatever, which probably got bought out by so many of the tobacco companies over time, they just they introduce all these what is it, vaccines and medications and everything of all that such like an ilk, and they just all they have to do is just put down all these disclaimers to say may cause suicide, suicidal tendencies, immediate death, what is it, all this inflammation and everything. And because as soon as they issue the disclaimers, that kind of covers them against all this potential backlash. But like so many things that are like over-the-counter prescriptions and medications, like what is it, codeine actually has, I think it's like a derivative of cocaine. And you've got like what is it, like morphine is pretty much just more refined versions of opiates. I mean, it is an opiate. It's just it's basically just a more refined version of heroin. Still
Yeah.
just as addictive and whatnot, but it's they can medically prescribe it to you,
Well, same with
and it's
ADHD drugs are basically meth.
yeah, yeah, it's bloody madness, is what it is. But yeah, like we don't even over here. It's never even called meth. We just don't call it that. We call it what is it, amyl nitrate, or speed. It's known as over here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's never like it's never made in like a smokable form. It's always just like in either as a pill. So it's usually mixed with ecstasy, which is your, oh, I forget what that is. MDMA.
Yeah.
And it's usually cut with that or whatever, and it's just put in a pill form, or it's they grind it up into a dust, and then folks just snort it like it's cocaine. But yeah, it's like it's really weird because it's like the whole idea of like smoking meth and stuff just isn't a thing over here at all.
Don't you guys have
It's totally bizarre.
they call them nangs?
Nangs.
Yeah, it's like I think it's like nitrous oxide. You like huff the nitrous.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. That's what used to be prescribed as laughing gas. It's what they use for literal nitros for cars.
I'm sure that's
To
really good for you.
no, it has a lot of health complications and stuff.
Yeah.
Same as any drug, it's like has lots of. I mean, like even like what is it, paracetamol? You can overdose on that. Like if you took 20 of them, you can OD and die. So yeah, even like seemingly benign drugs can be potentially lethal.
Yeah.
And things like what is it, caffeine, that's like put in so many drinks and whatnot. It's like it occurs naturally in coffee and everything. Think that like I've seen so many people tweaking on like caffeine, like and they can become downright murderous.
I heard if you had
Some of the people.
a tablespoon of pure caffeine would kill you.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think there was like some regulation or something put in recently because they kept increasing the amounts of caffeine in these super drinks, like your Red Bull and things.
oh yeah, they're getting crazy now.
Yeah. Um, because they do all that with I think there was like a something that went into effect over here with alcopops, they were called. And what it was basically alcoholic drinks that were marketed towards children.
What the hell?
They weren't actually marketed, specifically towards children. It wasn't like, give your baby a beer. It was just, they were prescribed to be cool and like sensationalized drinks. So they'd be like all neon packaging and everything
Yeah.
to attract people's attention, and kids would think it was cool. So you get all these teenagers and youths drinking it because it was all flashy, and so they called it, they branded it Alcopops, and they wanted to sort of like legislate against it and everything, and they, through regulations and whatnot, they clamped down on it. But it seems to be like a lot of regulations and stuff like that do seem to have a lot of positive results, and ultimately that's why they want to do it. At the end of the day, it's not so much to the detriment of people's rights and everything, which it can be. Like, if people want to smoke nice cigars or anything, it's like, well, I can't see the cigar. How do I know which brand I want to buy? It's whereas so some people will feel affronted by things like that, but ultimately it stops because it's out of sight, out of mind. It's less of a factor for children to buy it, and that's where they're kind of going with the angle for it. So there's advantages and disadvantages with anything that you put across, I think. And I think it's fair to look at the advantages and disadvantages of any kind of stance or argumentation, if only to help bolster your own stances and arguments. Because if you say you're like arguing with a lefty about something, it's always you're always going to look more favorable to the audience if you say it's like, oh well, I can see where you're coming from there, and yeah, I think you make a good case in an argument, and then provide a suitable counter argument. It's like, they're going to be more willing to engage and sort of like, understand and empathize with your ideas if you're more willing to concede a little and still argue a solid case. I mean, that's what I've always kind of, it's why I'm so dead set in the bloody middle, is because I always look at every bloody perspective, and I always see it's like, well, there's detriments here, and there's good things and bad here, and there's good things and bad here. So let's find a happy medium and settle on that. But more often than not, what I see happening with the left these days is just, it's kind of disgusting the way they constantly disparage the right, especially in the media, where it's like, they'll say, oh, this person's right wing, and as if it's a slur to be on the right.
Well, and I think that's one of the things is there might be something to a synthesis between two sides, but at the point where we're at now, it's just gotten so out of hand that I feel like the only way to combat this is just by being like incredibly reactionary. If you're not a real far right extremist, there's nothing that's going to be halting this leftward slide, right? And even the people that are I talk to you, and you're a very reasonable guy, but reasonable people aren't going to be what stops this, right? You need to be like so firmly against it. You need to be radically against it because they're radical, and if you don't combat that with radicalism, there's no going back, and maybe down the line you can go back to a peaceful medium, but right now I think the only way that this is stopping is with
I hear what you're saying, man, because it's like, in terms of the Overton window, and it's like things have shifted so dramatically towards the left, and we're just constantly conceding ground further and further left. And it doesn't matter which way you concede ground. It's like, ideally you want to be in the center. So I can understand, and it's why I'm more empathetic to the right, because they don't get a fair shake. They don't get really heard out, and the left constantly mischaracterizes them. And I think it's disgusting. It's like we shouldn't be othering anyone at the end of the day, um, because that's how you dehumanize. It's how you create out groups where you end up with, like, situations where genocides and what was it, holocausts can occur. Is like, the through the dehumanization and through the scapegoating of people as a group, and that's something that the left has always kind of done. And it's one of the worst aspects of the left, and they're almost completely blind to it, because it's what is it? It's like, I think everyone is always blind to their own echo chambers, because we don't hear enough of the people who are in the middle. And that's why you've always got to try and be as reasonable as you can, so that you can get more people to your side. So I would say, it's like more people should be on the right to help counterbalance the left. And just to say, it's like, well, I'm happy to, vote this way in order to counteract the other side of the equation. If you get what I mean, it's like tactical voting. You always want to appeal to the center, because the far lefties, you'll never reach out to them. The right, if you go too far right, you're only going to ever appeal to the right. So you've always got to kind of appeal to the people in the center, because they're the ones who are more they're more malleable to your way of thinking. The people who are the reasonable parties, they are the ones that are going to be like, okay, well, I'm not polarized to any side, and I'm more willing to listen to reason.
Well, they're increasingly making it impossible to be in the center. I mean, just you saying that you don't agree with forcing people to use the correct pronouns, right? Just saying that puts you on the far right nowadays. And I think that this is the thing is that, like you said with the Overton window, right? It's getting pushed so far, and a lot of these center people are going to find themselves on the right just by de facto, right? As the window shifts, if they're sitting in the middle, they're going to be ending up on the right.
Yeah, because it's politically expedient for the media to effectively treat everyone as a radical, and sort of like, because it creates more views, it creates more drama, it creates, more bread and butter for them, because they need that advertising revenue. And, morals and journalism are kind of a dying thing nowadays. The only real kind of typical journalists that are out there are people like Project Veritas, who are actually going out and doing real journalism. You've also got the Bureau of fucking hell, easy for me to say, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. They what is it's like, it's an impartial organization where people from both left or right or whatever, will all just kind of come together. They'll put their stories forward, and then other outlets will pick it up and take up the story. But it's kind of like an open, an open forum where people can sort of like promote their ideas in journalism without, specifically aligning to some left or right leaning rag, where their ideas will be distorted or editorialized.
Yeah,
Because that tends to be what's happening a lot more now, and you'll see that with even with places like PolitiFact. It'll say, this thing mostly false, and then you read the body of the text, and it turns out it's mostly true. So they're counting on people not actually reading any further than the headline
and
or the byline.
it's very predatory as well, because and I'll talk to older people, and even just 20 years ago, right? You know, Democrat versus Republican in America was so radically. I mean, you would say that a Democrat 20 years ago was farther right than a Republican today, you know, and but people, like, if you don't have a finger on the pulse, you don't notice that. And there's so many, you know, old generation people, they're like, oh, I voted Democrat my entire life, I'm gonna vote for Joe Biden. And well, they don't, like, but then when you press them on any position, it's like, well, what do you think about trans ideology? What do you think about open borders? What do you think about all this stuff? And they're staunchly against it, but they sort of capitalize on people just not being informed, and there's no exodus, right? We haven't seen this as the party has gotten more and more to the left, right? The people just tend to get more to the left instead of, you know, people leaving the party. And it's a quite an interesting trick of psychology that it seems that they're pulling off here.
Yeah, because they have a lot of like spin doctors and everything that will, you know, they're people who write speeches and everything. It's a whole organization of people that work behind the scenes that pull a lot of this stuff together, which is why, even though they can come out with a brilliant speech and they can sort of, like, you know, change so many hearts and minds, they can say something completely idiotic and ridiculous, you know, at the drop of a hat. Because at the end of the day, it's all posturing, it's all tactics. And they kept, what was it? The left kept attacking Trump, saying, you know, oh, he's a populist and everything. And it's like, bitch, please, come on. It's like, you know, the whole idea of politics and, you know, voting and everything is populist. The whole concept is. It's like, how can that be a possible criticism against someone? It's like, you know, oh, they're just appealing to the population. And it's like, what do you think the Democrats are doing? What do you think, you know, Hillary's doing? Do you think she's just saying things to be edgy? No, she's trying to appeal constantly to the population. It's absolute madness. But yeah, I think the whole game and the whole posturing, the whole sophistry, so much of it is dog whistling and stuff as well, where it's like, you know, what is it, the Great Reset, and the, you know, it's all these terms and stuff that you'll hear, and you won't just hear it from like one country, you'll hear it from this country, the other country, and they'll all be singing from the same hymn sheet, and you just kind of go, there's something going on here. There's definitely some big network that's where they're kind of going in and they're all having these meetings together, where they're organizing and coming out with things. There's something bigger happening, because the whole idea of, what was it, the whole COVID thing, with the way it's sort of like, you know, the way all the countries practically indistinguishable nowadays. Yeah, the way all the countries are kind of organizing and things, they're all sort of like, you know, putting forward the same kind of agendas. Like, you see what's happening in Australia, in the UK, and the US, and all these different countries. They're all marching to the beat of the same drum. They're all coming out with the same narratives and things. They're all talking about vaccine passports and this and that. And in order to get all these things together and get some sort of like cohesive thing together, you know that there's what was it, for the transatlantic trade partnership? That thing wasn't like over and above board. That was all happening behind the scenes. And what it was all these legal teams for each companies, I keep saying companies, each country, but again, they were acting in tow with companies in order to get a lot of these things enacted. And you know, a lot of this stuff is like bankers and stuff as well that are all coming together in order to create all these what is it, like trade policies and everything that all kind of agree, because these are massive international networks that are all forming, and these things aren't just happening out of thin air. There's a lot of cooperation and stuff, and it's effectively each country must have their own kind of system of a deep state where all these people who are constantly operating behind the scenes are getting together in order to develop these massive policies.
Well, you have this new class of well, I guess I don't know if it's a new class, but you have a class of transnational elites. You know, uh, no national identity, no loyalty, just they have absurd amount of wealth and power, and they sort of reign over all of these countries, and that's why you see, like you said, marching in the same step, right? The vaccine mandates sort of spontaneously occurred in every single country at the same time. Is that a coincidence? No, you have these the World Economic Forum, you have the Bilderberg Group, all these different transnational elites that are they're becoming like supra governments, and this is I mean, it's a problem, right? And how does someone like you or me, how do we stand up to this? How do we get out of this lockstep with everybody else? How do we carve our own path? And yeah, and you see, like you said, the equivalent of the deep state is sort of weeded itself into every single country at this point. And I don't know what the solution is, but I don't know. You're starting to sound kind of like a Nazi, actually, talking about bankers and things like that. They don't like going down that road.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is here, I'm not talking about some sort of like global elite or anything that's happening. I'm talking about like, these things are planned, they're organized by all these different organizations.
Well, how is that
They
not
create,
a global elite if they can pull that off?
well, it's what it is it's all just, it's a conglomerate of organizations, is what it is at the end of the day. It's like a huge infrastructure. And it can seem like it's a few elites that are organizing it all, but what it is it's essentially it's the CEOs, it's the big money makers, it's like the people who are the oligarchs at the head of like major companies and or organizations and everything, that all kind of effectively what they do is they work in lockstep with all these big banking groups and organizations. And what they do is these organizations, they all set up plans and things to implement things. It's basically fail-safe scenarios that they do. What they'll have is these big companies, and especially the global conglomerates, they'll have think tanks that will be like research groups and everything, and they'll implement all these plans and policies. It's all these fail-safe scenarios. So, like if Mount Vesuvius goes off and it affects global international travel, all these companies and organizations, they already have fail-safe plans already in effect. And we saw that with the what is it, the COVID thing, when that all went into effect. All these companies already had all these fail-safe scenarios and everything, and policy things in order to implement straight off the bat, because they're just kind of what is it? It's like having a rainy day fund or something, or like a bad debts provision. You have these things, and then you have your fail-safe policies, and it's like, okay, this thing's come into effect. Well, what can we do about it? So they have the meeting, and they go, well, we've got this, and this, and this will co-enact with this policy, and then we can roll out these vaccines and everything, in order to compensate. So they set those things off, and then the governments all go, okay, yeah, this is all the this is what our own researchers, independent research groups say. This is what this marketing group says. This is what the corporations say. And then what they do is they create an animal, and it's really boring stuff. It's not exciting. And then they all sort of like get together and they say, okay, well, what's the best case scenario? Well, they're willing. These pharmaceutical companies are willing to roll out and do fast drugs and stuff, which will help appease the. Because what is the risk of the fallout here? Is like, if we don't, if because we can't perpetually hold people in their houses, for time immemorial, we're going to have to roll out some kind of a fail-safe scenario, and we'll have to sort of like set something up. So they set up all this vaccines and everything and whatnot, and they don't necessarily know the fallout of what's going to happen in terms of people who are going to rise against the idea of a vaccine, or what's going to happen. And they're only thinking so far in advance and so far ahead. But they're what it is it's what is it? It's like a cost-based analysis. Like when like a company, when they see that is it going to be cheaper to pay a fine and commit a crime rather than do a complete recall of this like damaged unit that we've just released, and they go, well, it'll affect our profits this much, and they'll go, oh well, that's going to be really bad, so we'll just go out and we'll just pay a fine. And it's like all this stuff is all done by utilitarian means. It's kind of dehumanizing. We don't get a say in any of it because it's all done in the interests of corporations, and we have zero say in it at all. And do you think that we should have a say in it? Do you think I mean, how would you possibly implement these things in order to say, okay, we're going to put it to a vote to individuals? We can do a referendum. Well, the moment you do that and you give everyone a choice on it, is the moment it becomes politically polarizing, and everyone's like, well, you're going to divide the populace against each other on it. So there's like, there's so many like things that you can try and do, but I don't think there's an easy win on any of it. So what are your thoughts? Because I'm conscious that I've been yammering on for a while. So.
Well, I think it goes back to something we talked about earlier. It's like nobody is like purely evil, right? We might think that the people that are working against us have just these pure nefarious purposes, but it's like you said, it's more so they're just quantifying like human goodness, right? This perfectly detached sort of utilitarian decision making process that they're doing, right? And it's exactly like you said. Is it ultimately, is it better to just commit a crime and pay a fine, or to totally restructure everything? Like, which one's actually going to damage the global supply lines, and take away resources from people? So I think, yes, they do have, well, for the most part, right, their heart's in the right place. They have this image of humanity and what it can be, and they're trying to manifest that image. And I think the issue is we need to back off. And this is sort of where I get to some of my anti-technological stances and things like that, because this is just a natural consequence of that. You have this interconnected, globalized world, and because of that, decisions are going to be consolidated into the hands of a very small amount of people. And if you don't agree with those decisions, too fucking bad, right? You got to deal with it. So the whole scale of the world right now is just totally unsustainable, if you ask me. I mean, there's no way you can maintain this level of control, and I mean, the way the global economy works, it's almost like clockwork, right? And there's no way that can be sustainable, right? It's going to take a few black swan type events, and you'll see, I mean, the whole country can get upset by just a few things, like we've seen cyber attacks, right? Like there was that one pipeline that went down, and the whole East Coast in America didn't have gasoline for a week, and it's just things like that are a natural consequence of the scale of our society now. So ultimately, the thing is, we have to scale back, right? We have to have some sort of cutoff point where we say, no, you can't have a universal global policy for 7 billion people. It just doesn't work. You need to, go back to small community living where you actually can have a say in your direct life. And yeah, maybe you're not going to get the global supply chains that we rely on, but it's actually a much more fulfilling type of existence. And I think this is sort of, the radical position that not many people want to take. And I think they're sort of in denial about that. And I think if you're willing to give up, Coca-Cola and Xbox, right? If you don't have these, massive corporate brands, and then scale back to just the things that you need and what you can produce in a small community, it takes away all of these existential problems, all of these, this idea of feeling powerless and not having a say in your own existence. And I mean that's my solution, and I don't really see any other solution, whether mine's practical or not, is up for debate. But I just don't think there's any way that this a global system of this scale can possibly work to actualize the individual.
Yeah, and I think there's advantages and disadvantages to every system. I mean, even the globalist system, I think we've always got to kind of concede there to some extent. It's because it is the big boogeyman at the end of the day, but it's like you said, they are trying to do things for the right reasons. And I think, they're like a lot of these groups and organizations or whatever that are thinking ahead. They're kind of, they're not thinking about their next political term or anything. They're thinking about, 40, 50 years down the line. Oh, we've got someone's just entered in. But, so I think a lot of them tend to be, operating with think tanks. They're planning well ahead of the game. They're looking at possible terraforming, possibly coming out of the planet entirely and going to places like Mars, populating the moon, all these other potential land masses. So, and I think that's why you've got some of these elites or whatever that are thinking, we need to implement better population control so we can manage our infrastructure better, because uncontrolled population growth means that we can't really manage the system well enough. Because
but ultimately it doesn't make any sense. Like, why are we so the same people will say we need to control population growth but also expand our population throughout the universe. Like, there's no, and I think this is the problem, is like, if you just look at this purely like numbers game, it's never going to make sense. You need to have some kind of unified goal, and unless that, and that goal has to come from some sort of like extra material principle, right? Because like, if you're just dealing with money and you're just dealing with numbers, it's just this incoherent, like, I don't know, like what are they championing? Like the greatness of the human race? Well, then maybe you wouldn't want to depopulate them, right? But then if you don't believe in the greatness of the human race, why do you want to expand throughout the universe just to say that you could? Like, there's no rhyme or reason, there's no logic. So like I said, you need to have some guiding principle that is just totally absent from all of this.
Yeah, and it's because they operate behind closed doors. It's because it's not all out in the open that we don't really get to see it. We don't get to fully understand or see the rationale behind it. But there are many like professors and scientists and everything that all coordinate together, and I can understand the rationale, because it's like the the majority of people who are the high-end academics tend to trend more so towards, especially like in the STEM research groups, like the science, technology, and all whatnot. They all tend to trend towards communism as a kind of goal because they're used to working with each other, like internationally, with all these other scientists towards massive goals. And you see that with like the what is it the particle accelerator, the all these massive like international projects that all go work hand in hand, and they work like with all these different communities and everything that all come together, and all these scientists all uh, form together and create these massive goals. They see that level of cooperation. They see everyone working in lockstep, and they want that for everyone, but they don't necessarily, because again, it's echo chambers and bubbles. They don't necessarily see how how tribalistic some people are, how much different cultures can create a massive divide. I mean, it's great when you're part of, if you're really high up in academia and you're able to huff your own farts all day and say, it's like, oh yes, we're doing this, and you're all about the work and you're all about creating a cohesive goal. But when you don't necessarily have that same guidance and push towards something, then people will just sort of like naturally congregate towards crime or towards race or specific cultures or something, and they'll find that as their specific goal, and they'll see it all as a numbers game, and they'll fight against one person and one group against the next, and it just becomes instantly kind of polarizing to some heavy and large degree. And it's like not everyone can necessarily see that um if we don't have the common purpose and common goals, everyone has their own individual purposes, their own individual drives and goals, and different countries, different corporations, different groups, different gangs will all have their own agendas and purposes, and not everyone is going to be in lockstep. And yeah, like communism without that doesn't work. It just becomes either completely totalitarian or self-destructive, or both.
And I think part of it, like you say, they have this vision, right? This global vision, and if you can take the big picture view and look at 7 billion people, and you have this mentality of, well, to bake a cake you have to crack a few eggs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're comparing the scale that we're at, a few cracked eggs could be tens of millions of people, and
Yeah,
that's not something that you want, and even if you can argue that it might be better for our global population to crack those eggs. Well, if you're one of those eggs, you are going to resist, and there's just no way that you can avoid that. And so I think the number of cracked eggs is increasing and is going to continue to increase. And all of those effects that you're talking about, right? The meshing of different cultures, and resorting to things like crime because you can't provide for yourself in different legitimate means. I mean, what's going to happen when all the people that don't take the vaccine, right, and they lose their jobs? Are they just going to starve? No, they're probably going to turn to crime, right? Things like this that they don't seem to be thinking through to the logical conclusion, right? What happens to all those cracked eggs? They are not just going to go away. There's real fallout from these decisions that they're going to have to deal with.
absolutely. Um, and yeah, I think I can completely agree with everything you're saying. It's like if these people are kind of, if they're not accountable, if they're not held to any kind of bigger belief structure or anything, then how do we know how they're working? It's it's like they can kind of operate as if they were gods.
Right.
And
And
it's
well, and I know this is something that I guess we always seem to come back to, uh, but that's why I think you just have to have religion, right? I mean, right now the global religion is just like it's incoherent, right? And like you said, it's not transparent. We have no idea where we're headed, what our goals are. Whereas if you have something that is clearly defined, like a religion, and a clear goal, right? Some type of moral righteousness, then you have more satisfied people than what we see today, right? And even if you have issues with religion, and different religions, the concept itself, I think, is necessary for some sort of societal cohesion, and this is probably the natural consequence of not having it. I mean, do you would you agree with that, or uh, are you not in agreement?
how can I not agree with it? It's perfectly rational, and it's to channel my inner Fauci. It's like no, no, no. You just gotta have faith. You just gotta believe in the scientism. You gotta. We're doing it all for you. It's
Not
it's
a
all
bad
that crap.
Fauci impression, actually.
He's such a character, honestly. Um, I mean, he's a bit of a snake, let's face it. And the way he just constantly weasels, and he'll say one thing 1 minute and then he's like totally backed out and says something else the next. It's something else. He's like some sort of like cartoon character that just keeps.
Shape-shifting lizard person.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, he just, like, you've got to have faith in the science. It's like, uh, yeah, when we can see all the stats, when it's all transparent, when it's all open and free for everyone to sort of like review and look into, that's fine. That's what science is. Science is a methodology for understanding, using a series of logical axioms and testing procedures in order to sort of like make something that's falsifiable, that we can understand and transcribe and say, okay, this is what we know. And because it's falsifiable, we can say, well, with the incorporation of this new data, we can say, hey, we've made an appropriate adjustment. And then everyone's in lockstep. Everyone's marching to the beat of the same drum. But he's just he's one of these people who's been appointed and has all these ideas. What, you little cat? Sorry, she's squeaking and making a nuisance of herself, distracting me. But yeah, the whole idea of the scientism, as it were, and the whole leftist kind of church of yeah, just march with our with all our big amalgamated groups. It's like, nah, you know what? I was always taught that, when I was growing up, like, to be punk or goth or whatever it is, it's like, is to ultimately rebel against the group, to sort of like, to be an individual, to be that radical who kind of questions the status quo, to sort of like, become independent and say, well, let's let's give this some rigorous testing, see if it holds up. And if it doesn't, then it's like, you can kind of turn around and you go, it's bullshit. And that's what we're kind of seeing, is we're seeing a lot of this, oh, you just got to have faith in us, got to have faith in us. And then they just keep failing, and they keep mismanaging. They're not they're not running the show correctly, and it's just I mean, what are the polls like for Fauci? I mean, have there been polls to say it's like people who have faith in what he says and think he's doing a great job of being the spokesman for the vaccines companies.
I don't know. I'm actually gonna. I would say if they had polls, they would never share them with us because they would probably be terrible. Wow, you gotta be kidding me. All right, it says New York Times article says trust in health agencies and Fauci remains strong, but personal doctors score higher. What? So I guess 77% of people trust Fauci. Would you believe that?
No.
Yeah,
I do not believe it for a
that's got to
second.
be they're doctoring the data on that one, I think.
Well, you can actually uh, what you can do is you can look into the study itself and look at the questions that make up the response unit and stuff. Because more often than not, you'll find it's leading questions. And I did a expose on that. It was what was it? It was in regards to the 50-50 gender representation thing in Scotland. Turns out I went and looked into the data and everything that they provided and all that because they were wanting to push all the wage gap, this, that, and everything, all that stuff that became politicized. And they put forward all these studies, and it was by the TUC, which is the trade union collective kind of organization thing. And that's what the political parties were constantly using it for citation for all of their data to push forward all this legislation to say that we should be introducing this, and this policy because women feel harassed and everything in the workplace. And so I was like, okay, well, where are the TUC getting their data from? And it turns out they were getting their data from, I think it's Laura Yates, I believe it was, who has I think a website called Everyday Sexism, right? And it was praised, religiously praised as this massive feminist study, right? Not a scientific study, a feminist study, right? That said, what is it? That women feel sexually harassed in the workplace. So I was like, okay, let's do more digging. Let's see what this is all really about. So I did even more digging, and all the questions were very leading. It was like it was questions of women and everything to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you feel harassed in the workplace? So it doesn't matter what score you put down.
Right.
There's not a zero there. There's not there's not anything else. So no matter the results of anything, any submissions for that questionnaire, it's going to prove only one thing: that women feel harassed in the workplace. Even if it's if they put it down a 1, that's a 1 that they feel harassed. So you're going to get like average plots between like probably 5, maybe some might feel 10, and it's all based on feelings. None of this is actually evidence-based. It's all based on feelings. And the government were promoting this as matter of fact data, as if it were like, something that held true. It was a complete joke. It wasn't even remotely scientific. It wasn't, it was completely biased. And it was only interested in pushing a particular agenda to say that women feel harassed in the workplace. And it was used to essentially demonize men and introduce all these policies that were absolute bullshit. And it had no scientific founding or basis whatsoever. So yeah, always dig down into the raw data, into the questionnaire, see how the questions are lined up. Because more often than not, with a lot of these duddies, I'm saying that in quotation marks, they're bullshit. Absolute horseshit, and they're only interested in pushing an ideological agenda. And also, as it stands, this Laura Yates character is an absolute joke. She just goes around and demonizes men constantly, and she writes books and everything, and is pushed by feminist drags like The Guardian, um, and has her own column and stuff as well.
Well, you know what they say. There's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics.
Yeah.
And a very similar story with I saw somebody do like an analysis of, like, everybody says the 97% consensus on climate change, and how that data was obtained, and it's like totally absurd, like how the researcher came to the conclusion. It involved like a bunch of like non-scientists reading through data and asking if they thought that it like meant that climate change was real or not, and like half the people involved in the study quit. So he only had like a sample size of like 12 people reading through like thousands and thousands of articles, just giving like their opinion on each article. So it was just terrible methodology. It made no sense, and like half the scientists that actually wrote the original articles came out and said, no, you just totally interpreted my article the wrong way, because the people that were doing it really didn't have any background in science. So yeah, things like that, 97% consensus are just totally fabricated.
Yeah. And more often than not, people will cite a lot of this stuff. Just, they'll cite the original article or whatever. They won't cite the study. They won't cite the research or anything, because they'll never even look that far, because they're just most of them are just looking for confirmation bias. It's like, oh, well, I've got this agenda and I want to sort of like promote it. And I can guarantee that's what like many of these politicians do, because they're only interested in pushing whatever policy or agenda sounds good on paper. Because if they actually looked into the data, they wouldn't even touch it with a barge pole, because it's so leading. And even when I looked on the TUC website, it was like the gendered language and everything was just so biased as well. It was like, it was heralding women as angels, and, sugar and spice and all things nice, and boys are slugs and snails, and, all rapists, every single one. So, scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think this man's a rapist? It's like, well, everyone thought you were a rapist. So.
Yeah, surprised it didn't have boys go to Jupiter to get more stupider. That would
I've never heard that one. That's a good one. But
it was an old recess rhyme.
But yeah, I think it's hard work to go over someone else's data and everything, but it's well worth fleshing it out, really sort of like digging in, scrutinizing it, and sort of like being able to say and provide counter points enough to say it's like, well, we've looked into the study. Do you know what the study says? Do you know what the results were? Do you know what the questions were? And you can really hold people to account. And it just because I think you need to at the end of the day, because the truth will set you free.
True.
Yeah.
Well, Earthman,
anyway,
I think we're going on about like 3.5 hours. So.
Yeah, I was about to call it quits there as well.
Yeah, the truth will set you free. That's a good place to end it, I think. Well, thank you.
Well, it's been great. Thanks for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, we should, and we can do this again sometime. I think this was a good discussion.
Absolutely, and if there's anything that you're kind of can think of that you're wanting to really dig down on, because we kind of went into the weeds in a big way.
Yeah, but that's good. It's good to do that.
Yeah, so I'll take my leave, and I shall bid you farewell for now.
All right.
Have a great evening, man, and I hope that hangovers that you're feeling a lot better.
Yeah, I think it's had some time to settle down. But yeah, thanks for coming on. It was a pleasure. And
No
yeah,
worries.
have a good night.
Take care. Bye, man.